It's the year 21XX, and Earth is a dying shell of its former self. A fighter jet streaks across the sky above a city engulfed in flames. From the wing of the plane, Shido Jin, a warrior with silver hair and glowing blue eyes, looks down coldly. He has found what he was looking for. Without a parachute, he leaps from the plane and dives straight into the ruins. On the ground, a lone boy sprints through the rubble and smoke. He's the only one left, calling out for anyone who might be listening. The kid stops in the middle of a crosswalk, tears streaming down his face as he screams for help. Right in front of him, a massive horned monster lands, making the pavement shake violently. Another beast lunges from the side, cutting off his only path of escape. The boy falls back, staring up at the creatures closing in on him. He shuts his eyes and lets out one final, desperate cry. In his hand, he clutches a cracked photo of his family. As the monsters loom over him, he thinks about the ones who turned the world into this nightmare. He begs for someone to make them pay for everything they've destroyed. A blinding streak of white light suddenly tears through the red sky. Jin slams into the ground, obliterating one of the monsters under his feet. The soldier looks back at the stunned boy and apologizes for being late. He stands tall amidst the wreckage, his dark coat fluttering in the wind. The boy can only ask who he is. Jin stares forward with a cold, focused expression. The boy is breathless, unable to believe that a savior actually appeared. He looks out at the burning skyline and hopes this means they can finally take their world back. Jin moves to the boy's side as the kid collapses. He sees a massive, fatal wound torn across the boy's back. He tells the child to rest in peace. The boy managed a faint smile and thanked him before going still. His hand falls away as he takes his last breath. Jin stands over him in the silence. The boy's body slumps into the dirt. A man in a lab coat named Kagura walks up and asks if Jin was too late. Kagura adjusts his glasses and tells Jin it's time to face the truth and give up. Jin doesn't answer, keeping his eyes fixed on the ruins. High above, the earth looks like a scorched ember floating in space. Humanity is finished. These monsters, the corruptors, were born from centuries of environmental pollution. They started as mutations in the toxic sludge that covered the planet. They quickly evolved into apex predators that tore through military lines. Conventional weapons were useless because of their extreme regenerative powers. Kagura explains that they didn't give up and eventually used human experiments to find a way to fight back. He shrugs, nodding that there isn't anyone left to save anymore. He looks down at the dead boy, the final member of their species. Jin watches the smoke drift through the city and says there is still something worth saving. Kagura asks if he really believes there are more survivors, but Jin tells him no. He's looking far beyond the present, toward a future millions of years away. He asks about the nanomachines Kagura created to heal the environment. These machines were designed to do more than just stop the corruptors from regenerating. Kagura explains that his nanomachines will eventually trigger the planet's recovery. He's certain that one day, the Earth will return to its former beauty. Shido Jin agrees, believing a new civilization will eventually thrive just as humanity once did. Kagura looks skeptical, calling the whole idea a bit of a fairy tale. Jin doesn't mind. He turns to walk away, satisfied with the plan. Even if it's just a tiny possibility, he thinks it's worth the gamble. He realizes that his own power will be needed to protect that future. Jin enters a high-tech stasis pod, prepared to sleep until the world is ready for him. Kagura watches him, holding onto that slim hope. He figures simply passing on that chance is enough to justify everything they've done. The system confirms that the cold sleep sequence has been activated. Outside, corruptors continue to roam the wasteland, unaware that their end is being planned. A digital timer begins counting up as the centuries start to fly by. Decades turn into centuries, and the monsters continue to dominate the ruins. Time continues its relentless march, and the world begins a slow transformation. Thousands of years pass, and the earth starts to look a little less red. New creatures begin to emerge as the old monsters start to fade away. Nature begins to reclaim the land, covering the scars of the past in green. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the planet's ecosystem stabilizes. The Earth finally looks like a vibrant, living world again. Animals return to the forests and lakes, thriving in the clean air. The timer keeps climbing, reaching into the tens of millions. Finally, after a staggering 100 million years, the clock stops. In the present day, a pair of boots races across a metal floor. Hakama Phil, a young girl with long animal ears, sprints through the dark corridor. A terrifying black beast with glowing red eyes lunges at her. She's not alone. Two other children, a boy with cat ears named Shandy and a sturdier boy named Danpuo, are running right behind her. She tells the boys they're as good as dead if they don't reach the guardian god inside. She clutches a golden key necklace, her only hope for survival. She's certain that the legend of the guardian is real. They reach a heavy set of metal doors at the end of a long hallway. Hakama slams the key into the slot and forces the door open. They stumble into a massive, frost-covered chamber, but it looks like a dead end. Hakama stares into the mist, her heart sinking. The monster catches up, looming over them with its massive, clawed hands. Cornered against the back wall, the children beg for someone to save them. Hakama closes her eyes and screams for the guardian god to help. Suddenly, a massive crack spiders across the glass of a nearby stasis tube. A voice from inside the pod simply says, "Understood." A pillar of blinding white light erupts from the pod, illuminating the entire room and piercing straight through the monster's head. The light is so intense that the children have to shield their eyes. As the glass shatters, a pair of bare feet steps out onto the cold floor. Shido Jin stands tall, his body humming with a level of power that shouldn't be possible. With a confident smirk and glowing blue eyes, he looks ready to protect every possibility of the future he's just woken up to. Jin opens a storage box he found in the wreckage. Inside, his old clothes are perfectly preserved, right next to a glowing green syringe. He turns to a massive bank of monitors. It's almost impossible to process, but the system logs confirm it. He's been out for 100 million years. Shido Jin stares at the corrupted data on the screens. He's honestly impressed the bunker managed to stay intact for such a ridiculous amount of time. He looks down at a nanomachine injector. The only reason anything in this place still works is because of the microscopic machines Kagura dispersed into the atmosphere. There's also a message cube left behind by the scientist. Jin wants to know what happened to the world, but he needs to deal with his current situation first. He turns around to find the three kids who woke him up staring at him in total shock. One is covering their eyes while the others are just completely frozen. While he gets dressed, the kids stand there awkwardly, trying to process the fact that they just dug up a naked man from 100 million years ago. Jin pulls on his long coat and tightens his gloves. After an eternity of being in a tube, having his old gear back on finally feels right. With a deafening grind of gears, the massive bunker doors begin to slide open. It's time to see what 100 million years did to the neighborhood. He steps out into the blinding light, followed by his new audience. They're already whispering about him being some kind of guardian god. Jin takes a breath of fresh air, his eyes scanning the horizon. This isn't the dead rock he expected to wake up to. The world is lush and vibrant. A massive valley with a winding river stretches out below him, looking more like a paradise than a wasteland. Hakama Phil looks up at him, still clearly starstruck. To her, Jin is a legendary figure who just stepped out of a myth. The kids start running toward the woods, waving for him to follow. They seem way too energetic for people living in a world full of monsters. Jin watches them with a flat expression. He's trying to reconcile this green landscape with the ruins he remembers. He looks at the back of Hakama's head and notices her animal ears. Humanity was supposed to be extinct, yet here these creatures are. Then there's the other two, Shandy and Danpuo. One looks like a cat and the other a koala. Evolution clearly took a wild turn while he was asleep. He suspects the nanomachines played a role in how they evolved. Hakama stops and looks back, sensing his confusion. Jin realizes he hasn't even told them who he is yet. He gives them a small smirk and decides it's finally time for introductions. He introduces himself as Shido Jin. Hakama responds with her own name, sounding much more formal than her friends. The chubby one is Danpuo and the cat-eared kid is Shandy. Despite the ears, they speak the exact same language he does. Hakama's face suddenly darkens. She begs Jin to help them fight against creatures she calls corruptors. Shandy suddenly points toward the horizon, his face turning pale as he realizes something is wrong. Columns of black smoke are rising from the trees in the distance. Their village is on fire, and the corruptors have already arrived. Shandy and Hakama don't wait for permission. They bolt toward the smoke, screaming for their parents as they disappear into the brush. Jin follows at a much more relaxed pace. He's curious to see if these corruptors are the same monsters humanity failed to kill eons ago. They reach the village and find the heavy wooden barricades smashed to pieces, like they were made of toothpicks. The entire settlement is in flames. Simple wooden huts are burning to the ground as the kids rush into the center of the carnage. Jin strolls through the fire and debris. Looking at the primitive tech level, he realizes this new civilization isn't advanced at all. Hakama stops dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with horror at the sight ahead of her. An old woman, the village grandma, is putting up a desperate fight against a massive, armored beast with only a wooden staff. The monster roars in her face, and the grandma screams at Hakama to run away while she still can. Jin narrows his eyes as he gets a good look at the beast. It's a corruptor, all right. It looks exactly like the ones from his era. The creature is a nightmare of teeth and armor. Jin wonders if they've been plaguing the world this entire time. Hakama refuses to leave. A bright teal aura begins to glow around her as she prepares to use her own power. Jin decides he's seen enough. He blurs forward, closing the distance between him and the monster in an instant. He delivers a direct kick to the monster's face, the impact generating a powerful shockwave that pierces right through its armored hide. While the beast is reeling, Jin scoops up the grandma and carries her to safety like she weighs nothing. With the old woman safe, Hakama steps up. She charges a massive ball of energy, her eyes glowing with determination. She shouts as she releases the blast. A concentrated beam of light tears through the air toward the stunned monster. The corruptor tries to counter with a blast of flame from its gullet, but Hakama's energy beam slices right through it. The explosion is massive. The monster is engulfed in light and flame, completely obliterated by the girl's attack. Jin looks down at the smoking carcass. It's definitely not getting back up, which he expected. The nanomachines in the air are suppressing its ability to regenerate. He watches the girl, wondering if she actually knows she's tapping into the nanomachines in the atmosphere to pull off those fireball attacks. Back in his time, that kind of control was strictly for compatible humans. He recalls the days when those machines were first created in labs. He asks the elderly woman if everyone in this era can throw fire around like that. She looks at him like he's crazy and says it's only possible for some of them. Jin rubs his chin as he pieces it together. It's clear now, what these people call divine power is just their word for manual nanomachine manipulation. Hakama Phil runs over, frantic to know what happened to everyone else. Grandma reassures her that the rest of the villagers have already been evacuated to safety. Shandy and Danpuo catch up, looking relieved, but Grandma just sighs. She wants to know why they didn't stay in hiding like they were told. Her expression is grim. She tells them the village is as good as gone, despite the small victory they just had. She explains that the corruptor Jin just took down was nothing more than a newborn larva. It was basically a baby compared to what's coming. The main body is the real threat, and it's far beyond anything their current warriors can handle. It won't be long before hundreds of these larval swarms descend on the village and tear everything to shreds. A blue-haired warrior named Sarlis walks up, telling the old woman not to lose her nerve just yet. He rests a spear on his shoulder, boasting that he'll handle the main body and any other corruptor that shows its face. Grandma asks about the villagers, and Sarlis confirms he personally sent them all to the shelter before coming back for the fight. Hakama's father is with him, clearly relieved to see his daughter safe after spending the whole evacuation worrying about her. But Grandma isn't happy. She yells at Hakama for breaking the rules and going to the forbidden place where the bunker was sealed. Hakama clutches her pendant, reminding her that Grandma was the one who said a guardian god lived behind that door to help them in their darkest hour. Grandma looks at Jin, blinking in disbelief. She seems to be trying to reconcile the legend with the man standing in front of her. She admits that he doesn't exactly fit the description of a god. Jin just stares back, wondering what kind of stories they've been telling. Sarlis just laughs. He thinks the whole idea of this guy being a guardian god is a massive joke. He calls Jin an inferior species, a term that catches the protagonist completely off guard. Shandy tries to speak up for the guardian god, but his older brother isn't interested in hearing stories from a kid. Sarlis mocks Jin for his appearance, nodding that he doesn't have animal ears or any of the animal power that defines their race. Sarlis dismisses the earlier kill as a total fluke. He thinks Jin just happened to be standing there when the monster died. He brags that he could have taken out a larva in a single blow himself if he'd been the one to find it. Jin doesn't say a word. He just watches the arrogant warrior with a cold, piercing gaze. Sarlis makes it clear that this is a village problem. In his eyes, an inferior outsider like Jin has no place here. He tells him to back off and stay out of the way of the real warriors. The guy turns his back and starts walking toward the smoke, determined to hunt down the massive corruptor on his own. He tosses a final insult over his shoulder, telling everyone else to just sit back and shake in fear while he does the hard work. Grandma calls him a fool, knowing full well that he's walking into a death trap. She worries that if he ran away, he might at least survive. Jin remains silent, his expression unreadable as he watches the hero walk away. Grandma turns back to Jin, thanking him for his help earlier. She asks if he'd be willing to take the children to the shelter. She intends to follow Sarlis into the fray, prepared to throw her life away if it means protecting what's left of the village. But Jin isn't going anywhere. He rejects the offer immediately, surprising the old woman. Hakama looks up at him with hope in her eyes. Jin simply states that he has his own sense of pride to worry about. He tells them he's not about to let some kid call him an inferior species and then just go off and die. He's going to follow him. A massive corruptor monster breaks through the water's surface with a deafening roar. Sarlis tightens his grip on his weapon, his muscles tensing for the fight. Sarlis stands nearby, his voice calm as he addresses the massive beast. Sarlis lunges forward, blue lightning crackling around him as he declares his ambition to become a holy knight. He positions himself between the village and the monster, ready to defend his home. With a shout, he dives headfirst into the fray, determined to take the monster down himself. But the monster's tentacles begin to wriggle as they rise above the water's surface. At the tips of those tentacles are clusters of developing monster eggs. All at once, these tentacles release the eggs, dropping them into the water. From these eggs, swarms of baby monsters burst out and crawl over each other, leaping straight at Sarlis. Meanwhile, the massive beast remains standing like a towering fortress, not even deigning to lift a finger against such a tiny human. Undeterred, Sarlis swings his spear and charges forward, hacking through the swarms of cannon fodder squirming around the monster. He focuses his energy, determined to finish the fight with one final, powerful blow. He launches himself high into the air, trailing a streak of energy behind him. He brings his spear down with a massive electrical discharge. Sarlis smirks, confident that his strike has hit its mark. The monster is sent reeling back as the shockwave ripples through the water. But the deep gash on the creature's face begins to knit itself back together instantly. Sarlis freezes in disbelief as the wounds vanish before his eyes. The monster counterattacks, its massive limb swinging down toward the defenseless warrior. Sarlis can only brace himself, unable to dodge the incoming strike. Suddenly, Shido-jin appears, blocking the strike with a shimmering hexagonal shield. Sarlis is speechless, wondering where this man came from. But the situation leaves no time for Sarlis to chat. Immediately, one of the hatchlings lunges forward to snap at him. Jin stands there, his expression unfazed as his black coat flutters slightly in the wind, continuing to tank the boss. Meanwhile, Sarlis complains about why those damn cannon fodder monsters are so hard to kill. He raises a hand, readying his own overwhelming power. A massive pillar of light erupts from beneath the lake's surface, tearing through the monster's body like a sheet of paper. Sarlis watches, completely stunned by the scale of the destruction. The rest of the villagers rush toward the shore, calling out to Sarlis. The village elder and her companions stop dead, paralyzed by the sight. She stares at the carnage, unable to believe what just happened. Jin stands against the beast's massive, smoking body, holding it down with just a single hand. He tells Sarlis that the monster is starting to get heavy, and they should move back. Jin grabs the dazed warrior and prepares to clear the area. With a powerful leap, they both soar away from the monster's carcass as it collapses into the lake. They touch down safely on solid ground, away from the surf. Sarlis looks up at Jin, asking who he really is. Behind them, the monster looks like a giant skewer, yet its mangled flesh is already beginning to stitch itself back together once again. Jin explains that they need nanomachines to stop that level of regeneration. Sarlis is baffled, as he's only ever known it as divine power. Jin admits that Sarlis's attack was decent, but it wasn't deep enough to stop the healing. Sarlis wonders aloud if Jin is some kind of guardian deity. Jin looks away, completely uninterested in the title. He reminds Sarlis that this village is his own responsibility, leaving the warrior to agree. Sarlis shouts that he's the one who has to protect the village. Jin stops walking and calmly tells him he's got it all wrong. This is his problem now. The massive corruptor roars, its eyes glowing with a sinister light as it prepares to strike. Jin prepares to move, his focus narrowing on the beast as he readies his counterattack. He knows the first thing he has to do is completely immobilize the monsters. He dashes forward as energy begins to pool around his hands in a blinding flash. A huge explosion of light rocks the shore as Jin's power connects with the creature. Sarlis watches from the ground, realizing these monsters are a legacy of a foolish past. Lightning crackles violently around Jin's fist as he builds up his next massive strike. Jin looks back and mentions that since he lived 100 million years ago, this fight belongs to him. He gathers an incredible amount of energy, determined to settle the score once and for all. Sarlis is confused by the claim, but asks if Jin can actually pull this off. Flashbacks of endless wars and a blood-stained history flood Jin's mind. He remembers the tragic, brutal repetitions of humanity's past struggles in a forgotten era. He recalls the scientists and their labs, the birthplace of his very existence. Jin stands tall, declaring himself the very last creation of the human race. With a final shout, he prepares to unleash his full power on the target. The monster can only screech in terror as a massive blast of energy starts to consume it. A titanic beam of light shoots forward, disintegrating everything it touches in its path. The explosion is so huge it dwarfs the entire landscape, lighting up the sky. The villagers and Sarlis are frozen in place, unable to look away from the blinding brilliance. A young girl, Hakama Phil, watches with wide eyes as her fear is replaced by pure wonder. The beam of light is so intense it actually pierces the atmosphere and shoots into outer space. As the light fades, the storm clouds are gone, leaving a clear blue sky and calm water. Sarlis is left completely stunned, his jaw dropping at the absolute power he just witnessed. Jin stands amidst the dissipating energy, the heat from the blast still radiating off his back. He introduces himself with a smirk. He is the last scientific weapon. Deep in the brush, someone has been watching the entire fight through a specialized lens. It's the unknown night observer, a ginger-haired investigator sent to look into the new invaders. She's shaking with fear, nodding that not even the strongest holy knights could match that display. Her face is pale as she tries to process the unbelievable power of this mysterious man. She knows she has to get back to the royal capital immediately to report what she found. Later that night, Jin sits in the forest and activates a hologram message from an old friend. A scientist named Kagura appears, greeting him with a tired smile from across the eons. Kagura looks out at the stars, wondering how the future is treating his old friend. He admits that while the environment has improved, there's still a major problem to solve. Kagura explains that the corruptors were far more resilient than they ever imagined. Jin listens in silence, his expression unreadable as his friend speaks from the distant past. The message continues, showing Kaguya working at a terminal 1,000 years after Jin went asleep. He reveals that he spent centuries entering cold sleep himself just to keep an eye on things. Kaguya watched from a high-tech satellite as the world slowly changed over the millennia. Despite his efforts, he realized that the threat to the planet was evolving alongside it. A view through a scope captures a high-resolution image of a target moving across the field. The lens zooms in on an evolved corruptor, its red eyes staring back with a predatory and focused gaze. Static fills the screen as the recording shifts, moving to a different section of encoded data. Hologram Kaguya explains that corruptors began to evolve alongside the drastic environmental changes of the planet. He warns that these evolved creatures will undoubtedly become a major and persistent threat to any survivors. To counter this, Kaguya reveals he tweaked the genetics of newly born life forms, like Sarlis and the other beastmen. He shows an image of Hakama Phil, explaining that these modifications were meant to give her kind a fighting chance. Kaguya adds that he also left behind a specific source of power, intended only for Jin's use. Shido Jin looks at the flickering image, curious about the nature of the power his old friend mentioned. He holds up a syringe filled with a glowing green substance, recognizing the power Kaguya spoke of. Jin calmly injects the fluid into his arm, as the hologram explains that the nanomachines will soon guide him. Lightning-like energy surges through Jin's body, as he achieves full compatibility with the active nanomachines. Jin stares at his gloved hands, feeling the strange new energy circulating through his modified system. With a focused thought, a sharp metal blade materializes directly out of thin air in his palm. He reflects on the incredible ability to generate physical objects through the shape-shifting of the nanomachines. Jin tests the balance of the newly formed knife, finding the ancient technology to be remarkably handy. Kaguya explains that he hid similar power-ups in various research labs scattered all over the world. A map displays the locations of these labs, strategically separated to prevent corruptors from destroying them all. Kaguya shares his heartfelt wish for Jin to travel and experience the new world of the far-distant future. A serene landscape with a majestic waterfall represents the peaceful world Kaguya hoped would remain for Jin. Despite the uncertainty of the corruptor threat, Kaguya wanted Jin to find his own place in this era. The unknown night observer runs through the woods, embodying the lively spirit of the current world. She is breathless and full of excitement, a stark contrast to the grim and dying world Jin once knew. A bustling medieval-style city shows the architectural and social progress humanity has achieved. In a quiet library, a blonde noblewoman pores over ancient texts, unaware of the ancient weapon's return. Kaguya encourages Jin to take the time to simply enjoy this new world before anything else. The holographic image begins to distort and flicker as the old recording finally reaches its end. An older, wizened version of Kaguya appears one last time, asking Jin to protect this world until the end. Jin remains stoic and silent, watching the last remnants of his old friend's presence fade away into the night. The message concludes with Kaguya leaving the fate of the entire world in Jin's capable hands. Jin quietly acknowledges the request, just as Hakama Phil and Danpuo come running toward him. Phil is relieved to have finally found him, mentioning that everyone in the village has been searching. She grabs his arm and insists they head back quickly, as the celebration can't start without its star. As they walk, Shido Jin's attention is suddenly drawn to the pendant hanging around Phil's neck. He realizes with a shock that the simple charm is actually a high-level lab access key. He stops her and asks where she managed to get such a specialized and ancient pendant. Phil explains that the charm has been a treasured heirloom of her clan for many generations. She says the key was meant to protect them, ensuring the guardian deity would aid them in times of peril. Jin looks up at the stars, realizing he owes Phil's ancestors for preserving the means of his return. They arrive at the village center, where a massive bonfire has been lit for the night's festivities. The villagers are in high spirits, calling out to one another to join the feast and celebration. A hush falls over the villagers as they spot Jin, whispering in awe at the return of their guardian deity. Shido Jin stands calmly among the gathered villagers, his presence commanding respect despite his unassuming frame. A few men sitting by the fire voice their lingering disbelief, questioning if someone as scrawny as Jin could really have defeated the monster. Over here, our young man, Jin, watches everything with a brooding look. He notes how Sarlis is making a scene, brawling loudly with a bunch of local youths. The atmosphere shifts as one of the warriors shouts at the others, reminding them that they only ran away while Jin fought. Danpuo and Hakama Phil stand proudly beside Jin, enthusiastically declaring to everyone how amazing their guardian deity truly is. Jin notices the dramatic shift in the people's behavior, realizing they are acting like completely different people compared to earlier this afternoon. Grandma and a senior village member approach Jin, bowing slightly as they prepare to offer their official thanks. The village elder expresses his deep gratitude, stating that the entire village would have perished if Jin had not been there to protect them. Jin offers a small, humble smile and tells them there is no need for them to worry about repaying him for his help. He clarifies that if they truly insist on giving him something, he would prefer information instead of physical rewards. The villagers are caught off guard when Jin explains that he wants to learn the detailed current state of the world they live in. After a moment of thought, Grandma suggests that the best place for him to find such information would be the royal capital. A panoramic view shows the grand city of Kermosia, a hub where people from all over the country gather under the king's rule. Grandma mentions that the people of Kodama village frequently travel there to sell their specialty goods, made from wood silkworm thread. She admits that while the journey is long and dangerous, she has no doubt that the guardian deity will be perfectly fine. Grandma suggests that Hakama Phil should accompany him as his guide, as the girl already has her own reasons to visit the capital. She reveals that Hakama Phil can wield divine power, and that the royal capital is home to an academy dedicated to enhancing such gifts. Morning breaks over Kodama village, casting a warm glow over the peaceful valley and its winding river. Shido Jin steps out into the early light, breathing in the fresh air of a world he's finally returned to. He finds it hard to believe he's witnessing such a beautiful sight again after 100 million years. His thoughts wander to his old comrade Kagura, wishing he could share this breathtaking view with him. Sals, a young girl from the village, arrives with a fresh set of clothes for his journey. She tells him to put them on, offering him a specialized Kodama cloth as he prepares to depart. The village comes together under the bright sky to see their guardian deity off. Hakama Phil, the village leader, reminds Sals to fulfill her role as a guide properly. Nearby, the blue-haired Sarlis grumbles about having to stay behind and study, while others get to go on an adventure. Jin takes a moment to recognize Sals and gives Sarlis a bit of praise for his movements the previous day. Sarlis is absolutely thrilled, his face lighting up with excitement at the compliment. He pumps his fist, swearing to work hard at his studies while Jin shakes hands with the village men. The girl's father tells Hakama to take care of her health and stay safe while staying in the village. Jin gives a final wave to the cheering villagers as he prepares to hit the road. With Sals leading the way, the two set off on their long trek toward the royal capital. They travel through lush forests and follow the sparkling river as it winds through the mountains. By the time the sun begins to set, they reach a massive waterfall where the water shimmers like gold. Sals points out their path ahead, eager to keep moving while the light still lasts. As night falls, they set up a small campfire in the middle of the dark, quiet woods. While they eat, Sals mentions that they still have about 4 days of walking left before they reach the capital. She looks at him curiously and asks why he's so interested in learning about the state of the world. Jin just gives her a slight smile, telling her it's a secret for now. He recalls a warning from Kagura about how the monsters known as corruptors never truly go extinct. In his time, these beasts were a constant threat, thriving in the most polluted and toxic regions. But looking at the clean, vibrant environment around them, he realizes something about the world has changed. A grim expression crosses his face as he stares into the fire, sensing a new kind of danger. Sals notices his intense look and asks if everything is okay, remarking on how scary he looks. He apologizes, realizing he needs to investigate the people of this era before taking on the corruptors. Sals is left a bit confused by his sudden shift in tone and his talk of investigation. Jin then asks her to stop with the formal titles and just call him by his name. Their peaceful night is suddenly interrupted by the sound of galloping horses echoing through the trees. A group of mounted soldiers pulls up to their campsite, their horses kicking up dust in the moonlight. One of the knights speaks up, offering a polite apology for disturbing their rest. A small unit of armored warriors surrounds the camp, keeping a close eye on the pair. Their leader, a stern man with pointy ears, watches Jin with a sharp, calculating gaze. Jin remains perfectly calm as he sits by the fire, simply asking who they are. The man introduces himself as Argus Walton, a captain in the 7th Division of the Holy Knights. Jin recognizes the name, knowing these are the elite defenders of the royal capital. Karina, a hot-headed knight with dog ears, glares at him with clear annoyance. She yells at him for his lack of respect, demanding that he stand up when speaking to their captain. Argus quickly steps in to quiet her down, jumping off his horse to handle things personally. He offers another apology for the rudeness and asks Jin if he would be willing to have a talk. Argus Walton stands firm, demanding that the two strangers answer his questions. He leans down from his horse, his eyes sharp as he asks for their origin and destination. Sals, trembling as she clutches her snack, quickly explains that they are from Kodama village on their way to the capital. Karina, the aggressive knight with dog ears, lets out a mocking smirk at the girl's answer. She jumps off her horse, her armor clanking as she prepares to interrogate them herself. She points her blade at Shido Jin, yelling that there's no record of a human being born in Kodama village. Jin is impressed by the country's organization, surprised to hear that they even maintain birth records for the villages. As Karina continues to berate them, Argus suddenly cuts her off with a sharp no. He turns his focus to Salsa's tunic, identifying the high-quality Kodama cloth she's wearing. He explains that since such fine cloth for children is so rare, her story about her village is likely true. Despite his reasoning, he still feels uneasy and draws his ornate longsword. He levels the blade at Shido Jin, sensing a presence that feels far from an ordinary human. He examines Jin's modern gray shirt and coat, questioning where in the world such unfamiliar clothes came from. Shido Jin remains perfectly composed, his gaze unwavering even as the sword draws close. Argus warns them that many bandit groups use innocent-looking children as a cover to steal cargo. Sals desperately shouts that they aren't bandits, but Argus insists on judging that for himself. The young girl grits her teeth, her fear starting to turn into a flicker of defiance. Argus thinks about how some bandits use powerful spirit magic to overwhelm unsuspecting merchants. He watches Sals closely, his eyes narrowed as he evaluates her every move. He warns the girl not to try anything foolish as the tension at the campsite peaks. He is surprised by her latent power, thinking that she actually has a promising future ahead of her. Shido Jin watches the exchange in silence, nodding that these holy knights are more perceptive than he expected. Argus turns his full attention back to the silver-haired man, acknowledging that he is truly strong. He points his sword directly at Jin's chest, demanding to know his true identity once and for all. He threatens to cut Jin down on the spot if his next answer doesn't satisfy him. Jin stares back with ice-cold blue eyes, his silence only making the knight captain more tense. The two lock eyes in a silent standoff, with the crackling fire the only sound in the night. Argus shouts his threat again, his sword glowing as he prepares to strike with his divine power. Shido Jin doesn't even flinch, his gaze remaining steady and unwavering as death looms. Argus Walton's eyes widen as they lock onto Jin, but he's already starting to waver under our protagonist's overwhelming aura. Letting out a calm sigh, Jin reaffirms that he indeed hails from Kodama village. Karina and the other knights are completely bewildered to see their leader suddenly hesitate. She jumps in, insisting that Jin is far too suspicious. Argus sheathes his blade with a trembling hand, his previous hostility completely gone. He turns back to Sals, asking her one last time if she is really telling the truth about her guide duties. Sals is still in shock. She looks at Jin and reaffirms to herself that he truly is the legendary guardian deity of her village. Argus ponders the title for a moment before letting out a soft, "I see," his suspicion finally lifted. Shido Jin asks if they are finished with this interrogation, his voice remaining as calm as ever. Argus hops back onto his horse, telling Jin that his earlier aggression was just a necessary part of his job. He asks if they are also headed to the royal capital, and remarks that their paths will likely cross again. He invites Jin to come seek him out if he ever finds himself in trouble in the capital city. Without another word, Argus Walton and his knights turn their horses and ride off into the dark forest. Shido Jin stands by the dying embers of the fire, watching the knights disappear into the night. As they cross a wooden bridge, Karina's voice rings out across the valley, questioning why they backed down. She gallops alongside Argus, unable to hide her frustration that such a suspicious, inferior species was let go. Argus Walton rides in silence for a moment, the weight of the brief encounter still heavy on his shoulders. He stares straight ahead, wondering to himself which of them was truly the inferior species back there. His words hit the other knights like a physical blow, leaving Karina and a calm, teal-haired mermaid knight stunned. The unnamed mermaid knight, her fin-like ears twitching, quietly asks her captain if he noticed something the others didn't. Argus reflects on the terrifying reality of the power gap between himself and the man at the campsite. He reveals that he actually attempted to strike Shido Jin 3 times during their conversation. He remembers the moment he leveled his sword at Jin, feeling an invisible wall of pressure blocking his path. Despite his training and intent, every time he tried to move his arm for an attack, his body simply wouldn't respond, paralyzed by a presence far greater than his own. The cold, unwavering eyes of the guardian deity had neutralized him before he could even begin. To the outside world, it looked like a simple standoff, but for Argus, it was a humiliating defeat. The mermaid knight is taken aback, asking if he even tried to activate his divine power. Karina's jaw drops as her captain admits that his power wouldn't even manifest in that man's presence. He recalls how the spirits themselves seemed to shrink away, refusing to answer his call for strength. The mermaid knight admits that she felt a similar chilling sensation, her own connection to the spirits wavering. As they ride under the starlight, Argus notes the massive disparity in their fundamental divine power. He tells them that a feat of that magnitude would likely only be possible for a grand captain. The knights continue their journey in a tense silence, the frustration evident in Karina's expression. The young dog-eared knight clenches her reins, ashamed that she didn't notice the invisible struggle at all. Argus offers a bit of comfort, reminding her that she's a new recruit and Jin is an absolute anomaly. The group gallops through the open plains, their discussion turning toward the defeated corruptor in Kodama. Karina worries about the danger Jin might pose, but Argus is confident the man isn't their enemy. They decide to put the matter aside and focus on returning to the royal capital as soon as possible. Argus plans to delegate the bandit task to the guild, his mind still occupied by the guardian deity. High above the forest, the majestic spires of the royal capital loom against the night sky. He believes that if they can make an ally of Shido Jin, it could change the future of the entire country. The next day, the sun shines over a beautiful valley as Jin and Sals continue their long walk. Sals looks up at Jin, wide-eyed, asking if all the knights in the city are as powerful as those they met. Jin explains that the group from the night before was likely an elite unit of the Holy Knights. Sals starts shadowboxing, amazed by how quickly the captain was able to use his spirit magic. She tells him that divine power is what they call the ability to borrow the strength of the spirits. She further explains that the specific techniques used to channel that power are called spirit magic. Jin realizes that the spirits she's talking about are actually the nanomachines he controls. He finds it ironic that in this new age, his advanced technology is viewed as something mystical. But the way the knights look down on him as an inferior species still bothers him. He lets out a deep sigh, reflecting on how much the social structure of the world has changed. Sal chirps that there is a vast diversity of species living across the world nowadays. She lists off various types, including those that look like fish or even strange insects. She shares an old story from her grandmother about a time when their ancestors had almost nowhere to live. Sals explains how people changed over millions of years, adapting their bodies to suit the harsh environments they lived in. Shido Jin listens intently, contemplating how these diverse species are the result of millions of years of natural adaptation. He wonders if some human survivors simply evolved into these forms, before deciding that dwelling on the distant past is currently useless. He asks if those who failed to adapt and change are the ones the world now labels as the inferior species. Sals confirms this, noting that because they remained unchanged, the rest of the world views them as inferior in many ways. She reveals the grim reality that many of these people are sold into slavery, leaving Jin stunned by the existence of such a system. Sals admits that she finds the discrimination strange, believing it is wrong to mistreat others simply because they are a little different. Jin looks at the young girl, reflecting on how the rest of the world seems to have gone mad with its twisted hierarchies. A faint, genuine smile appears on Jin's face as he tells Sals that she is a truly good person. Sals looks up at him with a puzzled expression, clearly surprised by the sudden and heartfelt compliment. Their conversation is interrupted by the sound of a wooden staff dragging across the dirt path further ahead of them. A faint and desperate plea for help reaches their ears, causing Jin and Sals to look toward the source of the voice. A young girl with light blue hair and animal ears suddenly stumbles into the middle of the road, her legs giving out. She falls face first onto the dusty path, prompting Sals to cry out in alarm and rush over to check on her. Jin watches with a serious expression, his attention drawn to the girl's unusual appearance as she lies motionless. The girl, Poful, lies exhausted on the ground, her body showing clear signs of struggle and injury. Jin focuses on the side of her head, noticing a human ear, a clear indication that she is a member of the inferior species. Poful is collapsed on the dirt, breathing hard. Jin stands over her, noticing the bruises all over her body. Hakama rushes to Poful's side, asking if she's all right. Jin starts gathering energy in his hand, telling Poful to stay still so he can treat her. Poful looks up with a nervous, conflicted expression. Jin's instincts kick in, and he tells them not to move. Poful suddenly pulls a knife and holds it to Hakama's throat. The girl is using her friend as a shield, keeping Jin at a distance. Jin just stares back with a cold, blank look. Poful is trembling, but she tells him it's a perfect trap. Jin's eyes narrow as he senses several others hiding nearby. A shimmering figure starts to materialize out of thin air. The slave leader appears, congratulating Poful on a job well done. He steps forward with two of his men, confident he's won. Jin recognizes the trick immediately as stealth camouflage powered by nanomachines. The bandits surround him, and the leader asks which country an inferior species like him is from. He presses his sword right against Jin's neck. Hakama screams out for Jin, but the leader warns him that he knows what happens if he moves. Poful keeps the knife steady while the air begins to crackle. Jin calls out Hakama's name as things start to get violent. A sudden burst of electricity shocks Hakama. Jin tells them that power isn't meant to be used on people. Hakama is paralyzed by the electrical current. The leader is thrilled, realizing Jin actually has holy power. One of the goons leans in, mockingly asking Jin if he can use it too. He winds up for a heavy strike. The thug kicks Jin right in the chest, calling him an inferior species. The leader tells him to stop before he damages the merchandise. They laugh at the idea of an inferior species having any real power. Hakama realizes these are the slave traders the Holy Knight warned them about. The leader decides they've talked enough and hits them with a finishing shock. Hakama is terrified as she feels her consciousness slipping away. Everything is dark until Jin's voice starts calling out to her. Hakama snaps awake, gasping for air in the dim light. She sees Jin sitting there, but he's been stripped of almost all his clothes. Jin calmly looks around the room, asking where they are. He deduces that they've been taken to the slavers' headquarters. There are cages lined up all along the walls, filled with other victims. Every cage is packed with people who have been attacked just like they were. Jin sits cross-legged on the floor, seemingly unbothered by the situation. Hakama is baffled and asks why he's just sitting there naked. Jin tells her his clothes were rare artifacts, but he spent most of his life naked anyway. Hakama still can't wrap her head around it and asks Jin why he didn't just fight back earlier. Jin just stares ahead without saying a word, leaving the question hanging. Suddenly, the sound of heavy doors opening echoes through the dungeon. Jin sits calmly while Hakama glares at the newcomer. Poful walks in carrying a wooden tray with a few rolls of bread. Hakama starts shouting at her, but Poful just tells them to go ahead and hate her. Standing outside the bars, the blue-haired girl says she never expected them to forgive her anyway. Hakama's face is twisted with frustration as she grips the iron bars. Surprisingly, Jin tells her that she is actually a very kind person. Poful is stunned, not understanding why he'd say that after everything she did. Jin explains that a real villain doesn't care about being hated or forgiven. He gets up and walks over to the front of the cage. Jin reaches out and grabs the thick iron bars with his bare hands. Poful watches in horror as the metal starts to groan and twist. With almost no effort, Jin begins warping the cell door right in front of her. He looks her in the eye and mentions that he's been waiting for her to show up so they could talk privately. Jin drops a bombshell, asking where the person she is trying to protect is being held. Poful is completely caught off guard, wondering how he could possibly know that. He admits he was fooled for a second, but then realized the truth. Jin points out that while her own injuries were real, a true villain would never inflict that much pain on a comrade just for a trap. He deduces that the only reason she's following the bandits is because they have leverage over her. Poful starts to break down, unable to keep up the act any longer. Jin hits the nail on the head, asking if it is her brother they are holding. She remembers the bandits threatening to sell him off to traders if she didn't cooperate. The memory of being separated from her only family is too much for her to handle. Poful cries out that she had to do it to keep him safe after their parents were killed. Jin clenches his fist while Hakama looks on in shock at the tragic story. A dark shadow falls over Jin's face as he calls the slavers absolute scum. Hakama asks if he let himself get caught just to save Poful. Jin says that is part of it, but mostly because villains are like oil stains, they are stubborn and don't go away easily. He explains that if you let even one escape, they will just move somewhere else and cause more misery. Outside, a beastman guard hears a strange clacking sound coming from the cell. Before the guard can even react, Jin kicks the entire door off its hinges, sending it crashing into the guy. He steps out of the cage into the hallway, ready to finish this. Jin's eyes glow with a cold intensity as he says you have to pull villainy out by the roots. To understand how he knows so much about villains, we have to look back 100 million years. The scene shifts to a massive, glowing cyberpunk city filled with flying cars and high-rises. Back then, Jin was just a kid living on the streets, covered in dirt and grime. He used to watch the news and see reports about heroes taking down drug cartels. Living in a world that looked perfect on the surface, he really wanted to believe in justice. But as he walked those neon streets, he started to see the cracks in the system. He quickly realized that a world needing justice was not as simple as it looked on TV. Looking back at his childhood in the futuristic city, Jin remembers it as a place teeming with people who were nothing but trash. All he wanted was to live a normal life, but the thugs on the street wouldn't let him have a moment of peace. He quickly realized that his environment wouldn't allow for a quiet existence, and his cold eyes began to reflect that harsh reality. So he made a choice to stop being the victim and start being the one who took control. The thugs who once looked down on him were suddenly the ones begging for mercy as he systematically tore through them. He didn't just defend himself, he crushed them completely, proving he was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. From that day on, his life became a cycle of violence where his only goal was to eliminate the scum of the world. He kept killing until he was sitting atop a mountain of those who had tried to cross him, his heart becoming as cold as the neon lights. Then one day, a man arrived and told him something that would change everything. Jin stared back at the stranger, his expression unreadable despite the blood on his face. The man in the lab coat looked down at him and said he was simply born into the wrong world, one that couldn't contain his power. Back in the present, the nearly naked Shido Jin strides through the slaver compound, dragging a defeated guard behind him like a piece of garbage. The remaining guards are terrified, pointing their weapons and shouting at him to stop his advance. They look at their fallen comrades and realize that this intruder is something they have never encountered before. One of the slavers trembles, demanding to know where Jin even came from and what his purpose is. Jin just gives them a slight, mocking smile that tells them exactly how little he thinks of their threats. In an instant, he is upon them, grabbing a guard and throwing him into the air with inhuman strength. The slavers are completely outmatched, unable to even track his movements as he tears through their ranks. He strikes with surgical precision, taking down the armed men before they can even pull a trigger or swing a club. A beastman guard watches in horror as his fellow soldier is effortlessly incapacitated. Standing tall amidst the defeated guards, Jin's presence is overwhelming, and the survivors can only wonder who he really is. The sounds of the slaughter continue to echo through the halls, leaving the guards in a state of pure panic. A loud scream rings out, cutting through the noise of the battle and drawing everyone's attention. Poful, the blue-haired girl who was forced to betray Jin, hears the commotion and can't believe what is happening. Poful asks about Jin's partner, and Hakama Phil, the brown-haired beast-eared girl, responds with absolute certainty. Hakama looks on with wide, hopeful eyes, telling Poful that they will be fine because they have a guardian god on their side. She encourages the other captives to stay calm, believing that Jin is the answer to their prayers. Nearby, a sleazy man with a goatee and a brown trench coat, the slave leader, realizes he is in deep trouble. He can feel the immense divine power radiating from Jin and knows that a physical fight is out of the question. Trying to save himself, he begs Jin to wait and talk, his hands raised in a desperate plea for a deal. The slave leader forces a nervous grin, sweating as he tries to find out what Jin actually wants. He asks if it is money or slaves, desperately gesturing toward the cages to offer up anything for his life. He points to a young, terrified blue-haired boy in a cage, Poful's brother, offering him to Jin as if he were just a commodity. Jin looks at the leader with a gaze so cold it could freeze the air, his disgust for the man growing with every word. He steps over the bloodied body of a fallen guard, asking the leader if he is finally done talking. The slave leader is paralyzed by fear, unable to understand how someone could be so unmoved by his offers. He wonders why his spirit magic isn't working on this intruder, his panic reaching a boiling point. Looking up at Jin's imposing figure, the leader begins to realize that he has made a fatal mistake. Jin tells him that it actually helps that he is just a half-baked villain, making him much easier to deal with. He explains that real villains are smart enough to run the second they see they are outmatched. Jin mocks the leader for his arrogance, pointing out how he only started acting submissive once he realized he was going to lose. The slave leader can only grit his teeth in a mix of fury and terror, realizing his time is running out. Realizing that he has no other choice, the slave leader decides to play his final, most dangerous card. He lunges for a lever on the wall, screaming that the fight is far from over. With a desperate pull, he activates the mechanism, his face twisted in a mixture of terror and hope. A massive steel gate slides open, revealing a monstrous creature hidden in the darkness of the stronghold. Shido Jin watches as the beast emerges, recognizing the creature as an invader, a being from another world. The slave leader laughs maniacally, boasting that this beast was specially procured at the request of a mysterious, powerful individual. The massive, purple-skinned invader roars, its presence filling the room with a sense of impending doom. It raises a colossal fist, ready to crush the intruder who has dared to dismantle their operation. Despite the monster's size, Jin remains completely unfazed, his eyes locked onto his new opponent. The invader strikes with enough force to shatter stone, but Jin meets the attack head-on, bracing himself for the impact. The slave leader's jaw drops in disbelief as he watches a mere human withstand the full power of his trump card. Jin calmly explains that his body is far from ordinary, having been born with a constitution that defies common logic. He flexes his muscles, nodding that his density of muscle fibers is many times greater than that of a normal human. The invader struggles against Jin's iron grip, unable to move the smaller man an inch. Declaring that he won't hold back against an enemy of this caliber, Jin begins to channel a surge of crackling blue energy. He unleashes his true divine power, a blinding beam of light that tears through the invader with absolute authority. The slave leader is thrown back by the shockwave, his eyes wide with horror as his ultimate weapon is vaporized before him. Standing amidst the dust and light, Jin looks down at the pathetic man, questioning why he can't even tap into such power. He looms over the fallen antagonist, his cold gaze demanding an answer for what comes next. All the leader can do is stutter and beg for mercy, his previous arrogance completely extinguished. He realizes with a sinking heart that he has encountered a being far beyond his understanding, and that escape is impossible. With a single final punch, Jin shuts down the leader's pleas, delivering justice with a cold and simple refusal. Shido Jin finally gets his hands back on his black coat. He puts it on, feeling more like himself now that he's back in his own clothes. He looks over at the kids still trapped in the cage and tells them to sit tight for just a bit longer. Nino and the other children look up through the bars, their eyes full of hope. Jin heads over to a nearby desk, wanting to dig up some evidence of what these bandits have been up to. He pulls open a drawer and finds a ring of keys along with some papers. He picks up a document that looks important, thinking this has to be what he's looking for. But as he looks closer, he realizes the writing is in some ancient script he's never seen. He stares at the page, trying to decode the symbols. Turns out he has absolutely no clue how to read this stuff. He decides he'll have to get Hakama to give him some reading lessons later on. He turns his attention to the remains of the corruptors on the floor, wondering why the bandits wanted them so badly. Jin decides to let his tech do the heavy lifting and activates his nanomachines. He uses them to hack into the local area and access any stored camera footage. He figures there's bound to be some visual records from the last week. A series of holographic screens pop up in the air around him. One of the feeds shows the bandit leader meeting with a well-dressed beastman inside the hideout. The noble-looking guy has a sinister grin as he keeps his plans secret. The man, Lord Champion, laughs about something interesting that's about to happen in the country. Jin watches the recording intently, his expression darkening as he listens to the Lord. The scene shifts to the bright, open streets of the town. A crowd has gathered in the square to watch the aftermath of the raid. Poful and Power are standing in the middle of the street, looking around anxiously. Suddenly, Poful's eyes widen as she spots a familiar face in the crowd. Nino comes running toward her, shouting for his big sister. Poful doesn't waste a second and sprints right for him. She pulls him into a tight embrace, whispering her thanks that he's finally safe. She turns to thank Jin with tears in her eyes, but he just tells her not to worry about it. Jin looks over at the guards and asks if they're working for the local lord. Power shakes her head and explains that these guys are actually from the guild. She points out an old man in a suit with massive ram horns who's leading the operation. The old man, Padrak, looks over and notices Jin standing there. He walks over to the group and asks if Jin is the one responsible for taking down the bandits. He introduces himself as Padrak, the guildmaster, and bows deeply to show his gratitude. He's a veteran leader with a sharp mind and a formal way of speaking. Padrak is visibly stunned that a human could take on so many enemies without taking a single hit. He realizes right away that Jin is no ordinary man. Jin asks why the Lord isn't the one handling the arrests if this is his territory. Padrak explains that the guild staff are the only ones who deal with these crimes, as they're loyal to the king. He adds that if someone like Lord Champion committed a crime, the guild would report it directly to the throne. Jin thinks it over realizing the guild functions like the police while the lord is more like a mayor. He looks back at the memory of Chappion's face, knowing exactly who's really behind the corruption. Padrak takes the scroll and begins to read, his expression shifting from curiosity to pure shock. He can't believe his eyes as he realizes the document is a complete list of everyone who was doing business with the bandits. Jin asks if the local lord's name is on there, and Padrak confirms that with this evidence, they can round up all the traitors at once. Jin looks on with a cold, calculating gaze, realizing that the man in charge is even more of a villain than he thought. Pofel and Nino watch the exchange with confusion, wondering what the two men are planning to do next. Padrak explains that the guild will take full responsibility for the freed slaves and make sure those with known families are escorted home. However, he admits that there's nothing they can do for the orphans whose identities are unknown or who have no place to return to. Jin looks down at the two blue-haired children, asking the guildmaster if there aren't any shelters where they can stay. Padrak turns away with a heavy sigh, explaining that there simply aren't any facilities like that for inferior species in this city. The two kids look down at the ground, feeling the weight of the rejection and the uncertainty of their future. Jin lets out a frustrated sigh, realizing that the prejudice against humans is a deep-rooted problem even in this part of the world. He looks at the children, feeling a sense of responsibility to do something more than just leaving them to fend for themselves. Suddenly, a thought crosses Jin's mind as he remembers something important. He asks Nino and Pofel if they'd be willing to go to a place where they could actually find steady work and a roof over their heads. A small, knowing smirk plays on his lips as he confirms that he already has a very specific destination in mind. He thinks back to his meeting with Argus Walton, the noble knight who had offered him help if he ever needed it. Jin decides that Argus's estate would be the perfect special workplace for the two children to start a new life. The scene shifts to the royal capital of Kermosia, specifically the grand and sprawling estate of the Walton family. Outside the city, Argus is leading his knights back home when he suddenly stops, feeling a strange and intense chill run down his spine. One of his subordinate knights, a woman with long teal hair, notices his hesitation and asks if anything is wrong. Argus shakes it off, telling her it's nothing and continuing his ride toward the estate. Upon reaching the stables, Argus dismounts and hands the reins of his horse over to one of the attendants. He turns to his weary knights and commends them for their hard work on the long expedition, telling everyone to get some rest. With the business of the expedition finished, he makes his way inside the main house. As soon as he steps through the front door, the entire household staff bows in unison to welcome their lord back home. Argus wastes no time and asks his head butler if there have been any significant updates while he was away. The butler looks a bit unsettled, and the young maid standing behind him seems equally worried. Sensing the heavy atmosphere, Argus stops and asks point-blank if something bad happened during his absence. The butler apologizes for having to bring up troubling news when the Lord has only just returned from a tiring journey. Argus assures him that he doesn't mind and tells him to speak freely about whatever is on his mind. High above the main hall, a beautiful blonde woman in a blue dress watches the conversation with a cold and distant look. She stands there silently, her arms crossed as she listens to the butler deliver his report to Argus. After hearing the details, Argus thanks the butler for his diligence, stating that keeping him informed is part of his duty. However, his face darkens as he admits that the overall situation in the capital is far worse than he had anticipated. He thinks about the reports of invaders appearing right inside the city walls, causing chaos and destruction. He realizes that the breach in security is too precise, leading him to believe that someone must be letting them in on purpose. After considering the possibilities, he concludes that the most suspicious place of all is Harnisk Academy, which stubbornly refuses entry to outsiders. Back at the hideout, Jin and his group say their goodbyes to Padrak, with Jin knowing he needs to find a powerful ally in the capital immediately. 3 days after taking down the bandits, Shido Jin and his group are back on the road. Sals looks up with a bit of worry, asking if there's actually a place for someone like her in the capital. Shido Jin stays calm, assuring Power that since she can read and handle math, she won't have any trouble finding work. Hearing that, Sal's beams, all her anxiety disappearing in an instant. Power points toward the horizon as the massive capital finally comes into view. Even the stoic Shido Jin takes a moment to stop and take in the sight. This is Kermosia, the heart of the capital and the center of power in this new era. The scale of the city is incredible, filled with unique buildings and winding streets. As they enter, the kids are wide-eyed, watching the bustling crowds that fill the city with life. Power explains that the capital runs on imports, so everything under the sun ends up here. She mentions that even folks from their little village come here to hawk their specialties. Shido Jin is genuinely fascinated by the variety of hybrid races passing them on the street. He realizes that this city has evolved into a real melting pot of different cultures. The streets are spotless, filled with shops selling exotic goods from all over the world. Law and order seem tight enough too, with kids running around safely through the markets. But looking closer, Shido Jin sees that even this gleaming city has its shadows. He spots the harsh reality of the class system, wealthy hybrids looking down on those in the alleys. He muses that every era carries its own heavy baggage, no matter how much time passes. Shifting his focus, he asks when the entrance exam for the academy is held. Power tells him it's next week, but getting into Harnisk Academy is no easy task. Nearby, a blonde noble named Milia Ultons watches them with disgust, calling them runts and half-breeds. As the sun sets, the group finally makes it to an inn to rest their weary feet. Nino and Sals are beyond excited, jumping headfirst onto the soft beds. It's been a long time since they've had a real bed to sleep in, and they're loving every second of it. Shido Jin takes a quiet moment to himself, thinking about his next move now that they've arrived. He looks at the coins he has left, knowing that living in the capital won't be cheap. The payout from the bandits was a good start, but it's not going to keep them afloat forever. He knows he also needs to get the kids settled into some work so they can support themselves. His main goal is tracking down the man behind the recent chaos like Lord Argus Walton, but he needs an inn first. He ponders his next move, knowing he won't get past the front doors without a solid plan. He wonders if he should start by digging into the corruptors of this era first. He knows there are already people like Lord Jita trying to weaponize these creatures for their own schemes. These corruptors are a massive menace, and he can't just turn a blind eye to the threat. He stares out at the city, his expression hardening with cold resolve. He's seen what happens when these things go unchecked, and he's not about to let history repeat itself. Turning to Sals, he asks how people in the city usually go about searching for information. She explains that back in their village, they all had to chip in for books because they were so expensive. But she tells him the capital has a library where he can do all the research he needs. A library? That might be exactly what Shido Jin needs to find his next lead. He thinks he might even find a lead on the research facility that Kagura left behind. But when he arrives, he's greeted by a librarian who quickly shuts him down. She explains that those books are national treasures, and entry is definitely not a free-for-all. The librarian explains that the archives are strictly off-limits to everyone, except faculty, nobility, and students who have been properly vetted by the academy. Shido Jin isn't too bothered by the rejection, admitting to Power that he wouldn't even be able to read the local script if he got inside. Later, back at their camp, Jin practices the alphabet by scratching it into the dirt, knowing it'll take some time before he can actually make sense of a book. While walking through the capital's busy streets, Shido Jin finds himself at a loss for his next move. He doesn't realize it yet, but a couple of hooded contract killers have been tailing him and the kids ever since they arrived. As one of them steps into the open, Shido Jin's instincts immediately flare up at the incoming threat. Without a word of warning, the wolf hybrid lunges forward and throws a heavy punch. Jin reacts without a second thought, raising his arm to intercept the blow with ease. He blocks the follow-up strike just as smoothly, completely unimpressed by the violent welcome. The assassin thinks he's got the upper hand, but he has no idea who he's actually messing with. Shido Jin's eyes sharpen, as he continues to parry every desperate strike the hybrid throws his way. With a single, powerful kick, he sends the wolf hybrid stumbling back across the pavement. Suddenly, a massive explosion of fire erupts in the street, sending civilians running for their lives. The assassin isn't just a physical brawler. He's smugly throwing around divine power in broad daylight. Sals pulls Nino close to protect him, shocked that anyone would be reckless enough to use magic in the middle of a crowd. Shido Jin stands his ground, calmly asking what they want. The hybrid tells him that someone powerful finds his presence to be an eyesore. It doesn't take long for Jin to realize he's been targeted by a professional contract hit. Surprisingly, a smirk plays on his lips as he realizes this ambush is the perfect opportunity. The hybrid continues to boast, claiming that things will be much easier for everyone if Jin just vanishes from the capital. He lunges forward again, determined to finish the job as quickly as possible. But Jin moves like a shadow, his hand snapping out to catch the hybrid's wrist in a crushing grip. With a cold laugh, he slams the assassin into the dirt, completely ending any hope the guy had of winning. The second killer, a fox hybrid with red hair, joins the fray and charges up a massive ball of flames. Shido Jin doesn't even flinch as the fire erupts around him, his composure remaining entirely unshaken. A massive explosion rocks the entire street, kicking up a thick cloud of dust and debris. Through the smoke, the red-haired killer looks on in pure disbelief as he sees Shido Jin standing there unharmed. Jin reaches through the haze, his hand closing in on the second assassin's throat. He grabs him by the neck and lifts him off the ground, telling him to come back only when he's actually a threat. He tosses the man aside like garbage, daring him to try again if he's truly got the guts for it. The assassin is absolutely terrified, finally realizing that Shido Jin is definitely no inferior species. Just as the fight ends, a loud voice commands everyone to stop and stay exactly where they are. The city guard has arrived, and it's led by the same female knight Jin ran into before. She looks incredibly annoyed that her day off is being ruined by someone making a scene in the middle of the road. She points her weapon at Shido Jin, announcing that she's hauling the whole lot of them off to a cell. Shido Jin just smiles to himself, knowing his plan to be as loud and flashy as possible has paid off. The female knight's jaw drops as she finally recognizes Shido Jin as the inferior human from their previous encounter. Shido Jin stands over the defeated students as the dog-eared female knight approaches, recognizing him as that inferior species from before. She smirks, seemingly impressed or amused by the chaos he has caused. The female knight points her spear at him and says he has some nerve causing a ruckus as soon as he arrives in the royal capital. She laughs, remarking that once an inferior species, always an inferior species, and that they don't know right from wrong. A rabbit-eared girl nearby nervously interjects, explaining she just happened to be passing by and saw that those people were the ones who suddenly attacked first. The female knight looks blankly at her and concludes that she thinks it was self-defense. She looks at the defeated wolf student on the ground, nodding that they look familiar. Crouching down, she asks them if they are students from Harnisk Academy. She sighs, thinking that she just hopes the young lady isn't involved in this. Jin asks about this young lady, but the knight tells her subordinates to take the students away while dismissing his question as her just talking to herself. Jin notes that holy knights do patrols too, admitting he thought that was the guild's job. The knight explains the royal capital is huge, so they help maintain public order, then mentions she just happened to pass by while eating her way through town. She gives him a sharp, evaluating look and thinks to herself that still, something is different about him. She realizes this guy is seriously strong, nodding that those academy students from earlier weren't weak either. She walks away, telling him see ya and to not cause too much trouble in the capital. Shido Jin calls out for her to wait, saying there is somewhere he would like her to show him. The knight turns back, questioning if there really is somewhere he want her to show him. The scene shifts to the Grand Argus estate at night. Sitting inside, Shido Jin bluntly asks Argus Walton to hire them. Argus is taken aback as Jin reminds him that he told him to visit if he ever needed help. Argus asks if their numbers haven't grown since they last met, and Jin casually replies that it just happened. Jin explains they ran into those bandits Argus warned him about, and he rescued the kids who were being held captive. When Argus asks about the bandits, Jin says he beat them up a bit and left the rest to the guild folks. Argus processes this, wondering if he really took care of it all by himself. Argus asks why he's with these children, and Jin explains they don't have any family and are what people call an inferior species. Jin says he figured he could at least find them a place to work. The female knight listens from behind as Jin is told he has no obligation to look after them, but he insists it's just his way of doing things. Jin declares that whatever the process was, he's the one who saved them, so he won't do a half-hearted job and will look after them to the very end. His conviction leaves both Argus and the knight momentarily speechless. Pofel and the other child beam with happiness and relief at Jin's words. Argus agrees, saying the two can work there as live-in servants, which makes Pofel shout out in joy. However, Argus stares intensely at Jin and says there is a condition. He tells Jin he wants him to become an instructor, leaving Jin wondering if he heard correctly. Pofel and her companions sparkle in their new servant uniforms, appearing truly happy with their fresh start. Shido Jin looks at them and asks if they don't look the part, while Hakama Phil claps her hands in joy behind them. Pofel bows deeply and thanks Lord Argus, who tells her there is no need for thanks. Argus instructs his staff to handle their education and strictly forbids discrimination just because they are an inferior species, receiving an immediate understood. The children wave goodbye as Shido Jin and Argus Walton walk away together. Jin asks if there is an ulterior motive for making him an instructor, and Argus admits he appreciates how quick he is to catch on. Argus says he doesn't know Jin's background, but he wants to trust that he is a good person and asks this favor of him. He states that he needs Jin to go undercover at Harnisk Academy. Jin looks back at him and asks what exactly he means by that. Argus Walton continues his explanation, noting that right now, this country is being targeted by multiple factions vying for supremacy, leading Shido Jin to ask if there isn't a king. Argus clarifies that the king is stricken with illness and doesn't have much time left, so a battle for succession has already begun behind closed doors. He explains the problem is that people without a legitimate claim to the throne are plotting to seize the country. Argus mentions they are using the invaders and dragging innocent people into their schemes. Jin realizes that the Lord from before isn't the only one they need to watch out for. Argus adds that such dangerous individuals are also lurking and maneuvering behind the scenes in the royal capital, and they must uncover their hideout as soon as possible. Jin asks if the most suspicious place for that is Harnisk Academy, which Argus confirms. Argus knocks on a door and says he is coming in. As he opens the door, Argus explains that she will guide Jin from inside the academy. He introduces his younger sister, Milia Ultons, who attends Harnisk Academy and is seen sitting elegantly on a sofa. Milia looks up as Argus introduces the newcomer, simply acknowledging him as her brother. Her expression quickly sours as she asks if he is really leaving the academy infiltration to this inferior species, referring to what they were talking about the other day. Argus tells Milia to show some respect, but she retorts that the only disrespectful thing is the very existence of an inferior species. She says she could perhaps tolerate the plain-looking country girl, Hakama Phil, but this job can't be entrusted to someone like him. Jin notes what a highly prejudiced young lady she is, while Argus apologizes and asks him not to take offense. The unnamed female knight whispers that while the young lady is gifted, she has an extreme prejudice, to which Jin replies that she does too. Milia asks her brother if he understands her point. Argus explains that this isn't just an infiltration, and that Jin also needs to fulfill his duties as an instructor. Milia doubts an inferior species can serve as an instructor, and asks if he even has the aptitude for it. Hakama Phil accidentally lets slip that Jin can't read, prompting Milia to question him in disbelief. Milia sighs, saying it is completely out of the question, but then pauses. Hakama Phil defends him, saying there are many things only he can teach, and that Jin is way more amazing than any of them. Milia remains silent as she faces off against Shido Jin. She eventually concedes that it seems he at least has the strength to keep the academy students in line. Milia looks back and reminds him that being an instructor requires more than just brute strength. Argus facepalms at the tense situation, while Jin and the children look on. The unnamed female knight realizes that those students being troublesome was the young lady's doing after all. Argus apologizes again and promises to give Milia a proper talking to later, though Jin says it is fine. Jin asks what exactly Argus was planning on having him teach as an instructor, and Argus answers spirit magic. Argus says that from what he can tell, Jin is highly skilled in spirit magic and asks if he is wrong. Jin asks what part of spirit magic he should teach, and Argus tells him the basics are fine. Argus lists 4 basic spirit magics: ignition, discharge, freezing, and healing, saying that if he can do even 2, that is enough. Jin asks if that is really all, which surprises Argus. Argus asks if he can also use special spirit magic that only a very few can handle, while Jin wonders about this special spirit magic. Jin thinks back to the bandit leader and realizes that Guy was actually considered exceptional in this era. Jin smirks, finding the situation interesting. Jin agrees to the task, deciding to overturn the common sense of this era just a little bit. 1 week has passed since the events in the capital, and it is finally the day of the entrance exams at Harnisk Academy. The school grounds are buzzing as prospective students arrive for the big day. Among the crowd, Hanaka is focused and working hard on her exam papers. In a quiet hallway, Argus Walton leads Shido Jin toward the headmaster's office. Their guide mentions that the 7th unit must be exceptionally busy even among holy knights, but Argus says it's simply their turn. Shido Jin is curious and asks him what he means by their turn. Argus explains that once a year, a member of the Holy Knights is rotated in to serve as a special instructor, and this year that duty falls to his unit. Shido Jin looks at the grand corridor and silently wonders if someone like him is really all right for the job. He keeps his cool and remains stoic as they continue walking. The official leading them continues on without saying another word. He stops at a large set of doors and tells them to follow him this way. He opens the doors and announces that the headmaster and the others are already expecting them. The elderly headmaster watches them enter from behind her desk. Argus bows respectfully and tells the headmaster it's been a long time. She asks if it's been since he graduated as valedictorian, nodding he's become quite distinguished in such a short time. The headmaster expresses her gratitude for his cooperation, but Argus insists it is merely his duty. She leans forward, mentioning that she has heard many rumors lately. She says he's not only dealing with corruptors, but is also entangled in domestic factional disputes. She says she understands why he lacks the manpower to spare and must be quite busy. Even so, she makes it clear that doesn't mean the academy should be neglected. Lord Jita speaks up with an insulting tone, asking if she surely doesn't intend to make that man an instructor. The room stays tense as the faculty members stare down the human candidate. Argus tells them to please put their minds at ease about the decision. He claims that Shido Jin is actually more capable than anyone else in his 7th unit. At the very least, he clarifies, that's the case in terms of combat techniques. The headmaster closes her eyes and says if Argus says so, then she supposes it is true. Lord Jita is furious and shouts that he objects, calling out to the headmaster. He argues that in this sacred academy of tradition, it is unprecedented for an inferior species to be allowed to teach. He slams the table and asks if she intends to bring shame upon them all. The headmaster notes that Lord Jita has spoken his piece and asks for Lord Ludman's thoughts. Lord Ludman, the portly vice principal, agrees with him and notes the academy is home to many students of noble birth. He warns that if an inferior species were to teach, there would undoubtedly be backlash from both students and instructors. The headmaster admits that emotionally she feels the same, but she leaves the thought hanging. She turns to Shido Jin and says they should hear his side of the matter as well. Shido Jin takes a calm step forward. He bows and apologizes for the late introduction, identifying himself as Shido Jin from Kodama village. The headmaster is impressed, thinking to herself how remarkably composed he remains even though he was mocked. Shido Jin says he understands their concerns perfectly, but says he has only one question. He asks if he is unfit because he is an inferior species, or if it's because he lacks the necessary ability. The headmaster lets out a small smile and says it is obviously the latter, since if one has ability, nothing else matters. She then asks if he can prove that he has it, to which Shido Jin is ready with an answer. Argus Walton smiles and asks why they don't just put it to the test right now. The scene shifts to the Harness Academy Spirit Magic Practice Field, an impressive open-air arena carved into the side of a mountain. Lord Jita stands opposite Shido Jin, nodding that since today is for entrance exams, there are almost no students around. He gives a wicked smile and adds that at least Shido Jin will be spared any public embarrassment. Shido Jin stares back in silence, completely unfazed by the instructor's taunting. The headmaster declares that the rules are simple and that they will fight using only spirit magic. She continues, explaining that as he is meant to be a spirit magic instructor, seeing his actual strength is the best way. In the stands, a group of students watches with curiosity, with one asking what is happening after hearing they were doing some kind of mock battle. Milia Ultons watches silently, thinking to herself that this might actually be the first time she has seen Mr. Jita fight. Shido Jin closes his eyes and sighs, thinking about how pointless the whole situation is. The headmaster looks on from the balcony with Professor Rudman and Argus Walton, saying that they should now see just how much an inferior species can do. Argus Walton watches with a bead of sweat on his face, thinking that this is actually the first time he will see Shido Jin fight. A narrative box explains that the physical abilities of an inferior species are low, and even if they possess divine power, they can only manifest a trivial amount of strength. The headmaster looks down at the arena, thinking to herself that she hopes her assessment was not incorrect before asking if they are prepared. Lord Jita gives a menacing smirk and simply says, "Then." He summons a massive ball of fire and shouts for Jin to allow him to take the first strike. Jita launches the fireball with an explosion, but Shido Jin slides effortlessly to the side to avoid it. The students watching from above are shocked by the intensity of the flames. Lord Jita notices the audience and chuckles, noting that it seems some of the students are watching after all. He immediately begins charging golden lightning and lets out a long, aggressive scream. He fires several concentrated bolts of electricity across the field with a sharp shout. Shido Jin twists and flips through the air, narrowly dodging the crackling lightning beams. Lord Jita scoffs at Jin's evasion, calling him a typical inferior species, and saying all he can do is flee. He boasts that while he may not have become a holy knight, he is the man who once graduated this academy as valedictorian. He unleashes another explosive blast of fire, declaring that an inferior species is no match for him. Shido Jin lands firmly on the ground as the fire dissipates behind him. He looks toward Jita and thinks to himself that this power was not meant to be turned against people, but he resolves that it cannot be helped in this situation. A swirling vortex of blue and black energy begins to gather in Jin's outstretched hand. He looks Jita in the eye and tells him he will show him a little of what he can do. Lord Jita is left confused for a second before black cracks begin to appear in the air and floor around him. With a sudden surge of force, Jita is slammed into the stone floor, which shatters under the pressure as he gasps in shock. Professor Rudman and the headmaster jump up, their faces filled with utter surprise at what just occurred. Argus Walton is equally stunned, staring at the arena with his mouth open in disbelief. Milia Ultons watches from the stands, her expression turned to one of pure terror. Jita is pinned to the ground and struggles to speak, desperately asking what just happened. Shido Jin walks closer and calmly explains that he manipulated the gravity around him slightly, asking if that was a spirit magic he was unfamiliar with. A smirk forms on his face as he notes that there seems to be much for him to teach at this academy. He tightens his glove and finishes by saying he has much to teach not only to the students, but to them all as well. Shido Jin stands tall in the middle of the courtyard, his opponent trapped within a humming hexagonal spirit magic barrier, marking an overwhelming victory with just a single move. The wolf instructor is shaking with shock and anger, unable to believe that a human just effortlessly blocked his magic. With a casual snap of his fingers, Shido Jin dispels the energy field and the remaining magic. The wolf instructor falls to his knees, staring up at the man in total disbelief. He manages to stammer out, "Why what did you do?" But Shido Jin just calmly replies, "Spirit magic, so what?" The instructor keeps shouting, "I've never heard of spirit magic like that before. You must have used some kind of underhanded trick," while Jin just tries to calm him down with a "hey, hey." Shido Jin begins to say, "Well," while the wolf instructor continues his angry outburst in the background. The headmistress declares that settles it, and Professor Rudman agrees with a solemn, "Indeed." Students gathered on the balcony whisper to each other, completely stunned by the outcome. Students ask, "Did you see that? And what was that just now?" While Milia Ultons realizes that was definitely a special type of spirit magic. The princess wonders why. Unlike us, who evolved after receiving the blessing of spirits, the sacred power of inferior species should be practically non-existent. Milia stares down at the courtyard with a look of intense suspicion. The instructor even grabs Jin's collar, but the human just tells him to calm down as Milia thinks, just who is that man? 1 week passes, and the view shifts to the grand scale of Harnisk Academy. The school teaches regular subjects, but its true purpose is to train warriors who will defeat the invaders. A stern warning is given to the new students. Those who cannot keep up will be forced to leave this academy without mercy. The headmistress speaks from the podium, telling them, "But if you graduate from here, joining the Holy Knights won't just be a dream." She looks out over the crowd and emphasizes that everything depends on your ability. A cat hybrid student remarks, "There are a lot of freshmen this year. Yeah, looks like many of them are commoners." Milia stands silently on the balcony as a hand reaches out and Reyes, a lion hybrid student, says, "Yo." He addresses her, saying, "It's rare for you to show up at the entrance ceremony. I thought you weren't interested in other people." He continued with a smirk, "If there's some famous noble among the freshmen, you'd want to get friendly with them, right?" And she retorted, "Aren't you the same?" Suddenly he notices something in the crowd and asks him, "What's that?" Reyes points down and asks, "Why is an inferior species sitting in the instructor's seats?" But Milia just tells him because he's an instructor. He shouted, "What?" She didn't even bother to explain and asked back, "From your perspective, what do you think about that man?" The lion hybrid is left speechless, thinking to himself, "Even if you ask me that, he's just an inferior species." Milia stares intently at the human instructor and admits, "At least that's what I used to think." Shido Jin sits in his assigned seat, feeling the intense gaze of the students from the balcony. He thinks to himself, this academy is huge. Investigating it will take time. The weight of the prejudice is clear as he thinks, even so, those stares hurt. First, I need to erase this inferior species image. Walking through the campus, Jin realizes at this rate, I stand out far too much. Instead of investigating, I look like the most suspicious person in the academy. First, I need to earn their recognition. A bell rings out, signaling the start of classes. In the classroom, the wolf instructor announces, "Now then, we will resume the spirit magic lectures starting today." He tells the elite students, "Make sure you don't get overtaken by the freshmen. Don't let your guards down. Though for you elite class students, this warning might not be necessary." With a devious smirk, he adds, "Or, I'd like to say, but." He looks at the empty room and asks, "What's this about? There are fewer people today. Do you even have any motivation, Tilda?" Tilda. Milia, sitting above, also felt disgusted by the instructor's cheap trick. She knew all too well that it was a given. The instructor thinks with a smug grin, HMPH, who would want to listen to an inferior species talk. He gloats internally, after all, today's lecture is being handled by an inferior species. I made sure to spread the word beforehand. He puts on a fake front and says, honestly, "Well then, Professor Jin, please introduce yourself." Shido Jin steps up to the podium and introduces himself. "As you've heard, my name is Shido Jin." He addresses the small group, saying, "Regarding spirit magic, I will be teaching you for a while. I look forward to working with you." Reyes looks at the new human instructor with a crossed-arm, skeptical expression and asks, "Can you really handle this job?" Shido Jin gives a subtle smile and simply tells the red-haired student, "That's for you to decide." Jin continues, telling him, "If you think it has no value, you simply don't have to attend my class," to which Reyes just smirks and replies, "Oh really?" Getting serious, Jin leans in slightly and adds, "But there's one thing I want you to follow." A small orb of light glows in Jin's hand as he issues a firm command. "Do not use this power against people." He explains the mechanics of their world, stating that spirit magic has the power to hinder the incredible regenerative ability of the invaders. However, he clarifies that this regeneration inhibition does not activate against the human body, so it will simply result in an injury, and then he asks the class, "And why is that?" Jin clenches his fist, the light intensifying as he answers his own question, "Because this power was created to defeat the invaders." Milia Ultons watches from the crowd with a nervous, sweating expression as Jin finishes his warning. "So please, do not misuse this power." A dark-haired student with wolf ears lets out a jagged haw and arrogantly asks, "Are you stupid?" as he declares that power is power. This wolf student aggressor, leaning back in his seat, continues with a condescending tone, "I came to see what kind of lecture an inferior species would give. And you're saying us not to use spirit magic." Other students join in the mockery, and a female student laughs, saying, "You're just a powerless inferior species who doesn't want to be compared, right?" The entire lecture hall is filled with the sound of students snickering and looking down on the humans standing at the podium. Shido Jin remains perfectly composed, his calm gaze scanning the room as the laughter continues. He breaks the silence with a cold challenge. "If you think I have no power, then try it." The wolf student aggressor is taken aback, letting out a confused huh, while Jin continues, "Use the strongest power you have and fire it at me." Jin stands tall and offers a deal. "If you manage to injure me with it, I promise I won't show up again after today." Hearing that he has a chance to get rid of the human, the wolf student breaks into a wide, malicious grin. The wolf student aggressor begins to manifest a surge of lightning and fire, shouting, "Don't regret it, inferior species. It'll be too late to back out now." The supervising instructor nearby panics as the energy crackles, screaming out, "WH, hey, you idiot, stop, you're gonna hit me too." With a fierce expression, the wolf student launches the lethal blast directly at the human, screaming, "Take this." The combined lance of fire and lightning streaks through the air, aimed straight at Shido Jin's head. A massive explosion of dust and energy erupts at the front of the classroom where Jin was standing. The wolf student, aggressor, smirks, convinced that his attack has obliterated the target. Suddenly, a razor-sharp magic dagger slices through the smoke and streaks back towards the attacker. The energy beam flies past the wolf student with terrifying speed, barely missing him. He stands frozen in terror, a look of complete shock on his face as the wall behind him is shattered by the impact. Shido Jin's cold eyes pierce through the dissipating smoke as he says, "If I had intended to, that attack would have finished you just now." Standing behind a solid hexagonal shield, Jin lectures the class, saying, "Judging people by appearances alone can be fatal." Reyes stares in disbelief, his eyes wide as he breaks into a cold sweat and wonders, what was that? Was that spirit magic? The room goes quiet as Jin addresses the students. "You called me an inferior species because I'm inferior, right? But since I'm stronger than you." Jin manifests a glowing aura around his hand and asks, "Then what should you call me? I'll give you the answer." He stands confidently at the podium and declares the new hierarchy, its teacher. Shido Jin stands behind the podium, facing the classroom with Professor Rudman watching from behind. He calls out to the students, asking if they even know the conditions to activate spirit magic. Looking out at the small group of students, Shido Jin focuses on the one who just attacked him and tells him to answer the question, saying, You attacked me. Answer me." The wolf student, aggressor, looks back, confused, and asks if it isn't just about visualization. Attempting to explain, the wolf student, aggressor, says that you raise your divine power, picture the force you want, project it to the spirits, and then manifest it, claiming these are the basics. Shido Jin gives a subtle smile, nodding that while visualization is definitely important, it's not the actual condition to activate it. Blue energy gathers in Shido Jin's hand as he explains that spirits, or rather nanomachines, must receive a specific wavelength before they can unleash their power. The wolf student, Aggressor, is taken aback by the term wavelength as Shido Jin clarifies that there are 8 fundamental wavelengths. Shido Jin starts his demonstration by manifesting a ball of fire above his open palm. He instantly shifts the energy into crackling bolts of lightning. With another effortless change, a glowing green orb of wind forms in his hand. Shido Jin creates a sharp shard of ice, telling the class that they should already know about things like freezing up to this point. Milia Ultons and Reyes watch in stunned silence as Shido Jin continues, saying that in addition to these common elements, there are others. He produces a dark purple mass for gravity manipulation, and a brilliant white light for light intensity manipulation. A swirling green vortex demonstrates atmospheric pressure manipulation, as Shido Jin mentions the thing he showed them earlier. A large blue crystalline barrier surrounds Shido Jin, which he identifies as space protection. Professor Rudman is frozen in pure shock, screaming at the realization that Shido Jin can use 8 different types of spirit magic. Holding a small spark of energy, Shido Jin reminds them that visualization is key, just like how the student turned a discharge into a spear to throw at him earlier. A confident smirk crosses Shido Jin's face as he says, "Now." With his arms crossed and a smug expression, Shido Jin asks if they should finally begin the lesson. After the class ends, Shido Jin walks through the quiet hallways of the academy. Shido Jin stops to think, realizing he needs to investigate this sprawling academy, but he's hitting a snag. Glancing at the passing students, he notes that they are walking around everywhere he goes, making it impossible to find anything suspicious. He decides he needs to find a place where students aren't allowed, unaware that Milia Ultons is trailing behind him. Shido Jin looks back with a sharp gaze, while Milia Ultons watches him closely. Milia Ulton steps forward to confront him, arms crossed, and asks who he really is. Shido Jin stops as she admits he's not normal, since he clearly wasn't just some regular inferior species. Milia Ultons remains skeptical, stating there's no way an inferior species could handle all types of spirit magic. Shido Jin reiterates what he just taught in class, that anyone can use them as long as they know how to switch between wavelengths. Milia snaps back, telling him not to act like everything is so easy. Milia Ultons looks away, observing that if it were really possible, he wouldn't be drawing so much attention from the other students. She tells him they should go somewhere else to continue the conversation. The scene shifts to a quiet, open-air corridor of the academy as the sun begins to set. Milia Ultons looks back at Shido Jin and asks if he's going to answer her questions now. Shido Jin walks beside her, calmly claiming he's just an ancient human who slept in Kodama village for 100 million years, but Milia Ultons just thinks he's a pretty good joker. Milia Ultons takes a more serious tone, asking what exactly he was doing 100 million years ago. Shido Jin rests his gloved hand on his chin, admitting he did a lot of things and that he was an agent. Confused, Milia Ultons had no idea what an agent even meant. Jin cracked a joke, suggesting that it's someone who works themselves to the bone for their country. Shido Jin looks down, his expression hardening as he says he fought countless villains. A flashback shows Shido Jin in a modern military setting, sitting with his comrades. He thinks about how it still feels clear even though it was 100 million years ago. He recalls his team gathered around a whiteboard, planning an attack strategy with technical diagrams. He remembers being in the field, gun in hand, taking cover while bullets sparked off a nearby wall, nodding he can remember it like it happened yesterday. Shido Jin closes his eyes as a vision of an explosion blends with his face, thinking to himself how nostalgic it all is. Milia Ultons asks him how a person like him ended up sleeping for 100 million years, to which Shido Jin simply replies, "I failed." Shido Jin reflects on his past, thinking that he was arrogant enough to think he could handle it all on his own. A memory of a destroyed city plagued by monstrous creatures flashes through his mind, as he realizes that, as a result, he lost everything without being able to do a single thing. Back in the present, Shido Jin explains to Milia Ultons that the reason he took this lecturer job was so that if push comes to shove, he could count on them to help him. Milia Ultons looks at him skeptically, wondering to herself how much of that is the truth. As they walk through the academy grounds, Shido Jin asks, by the way, where are we heading? Milia Ultons simply replies that she is just fulfilling her duty as a guide, that's all. They reach a seemingly ordinary room, where a sound emanates from within as they open the door. Shido Jin looks around the cluttered interior and wonders, this is. Milia Ultons explains that this is where lecturers keep the materials for their classes. Shido Jin considers the space, questioning if it is just a storage room. He turns his attention to a bookshelf, noticing a small owl carving sitting among the books. His gaze sharpens as he inspects the area more closely. Shido Jin asks why they are here, and Milia Ultons reveals a piece of paper, explaining that it means she's been doing some investigating of her own. She points to a blueprint, nodding there is an unnatural space next to this room that is big enough to fit another whole room inside. Milia Ultons remarks how suspicious it is, certain that if there is something here, it is definitely in that spot. Shido Jin agrees as he moves the owl carving. A hidden mechanism is triggered, causing a section of the wall to slide open and reveal a dark staircase. Standing before the newly revealed passage, Shido Jin tells Milia Ultons that her deduction was spot on. Milia Ultons is surprised and asks how he knew. Shido Jin explains that even though this place is covered in dust, something stood out. He points to the shelf, nodding that this spot was unnaturally clean, attributing his find to a bit of intuition born from experience. Shido Jin begins to descend into the darkness, telling Milia Ultons he will go check what is inside and that she should wait here. She immediately protests, shouting for him to wait and that she is coming too. Shido Jin warns her that if there is something in there, it is a corruptor, and tells her it is dangerous. Milia Ultons glares at him, telling him not to dare look down on her. Milia Ultons proudly states that her grades are among the top in her year, and that she possesses skills no less than her brothers. Shido Jin gives a small smile and agrees to trust her. They make their way down the stone stairs, with Shido Jin using an orb of light to illuminate the path. Shido Jin observes that the path goes quite deep underground and thinks about how light intensity manipulation is convenient. Milia Ultons notices his focus and asks what about it. He looks into the dark corridor ahead, thinking this atmosphere feels like something out of a fantasy game where a monster might pop out. Milia Ultons catches the word and wonders if he said fantasy. Milia Ultons changes the subject, asking, by the way, about what he said earlier regarding fighting villains all this time. She asks if he already has a target in mind for who is suspicious. Shido Jin laughs it off, saying she is demanding a lot for their first day. Shido Jin pauses for a moment, admitting that he supposes he does. A vision of Professor Rudman appears as Shido Jin suggests that maybe he might be involved. Milia Ultons is curious and asks how he can tell. Shido Jin recalls Professor Rudman's behavior, thinking that he is calm when he is talking, but there is more to it. He reflects that when the professor is not talking to anyone, his mind isn't there, which is a trait seen in people forced to do things other than their intended purpose. He adds that the man is also abnormally guarded, although he tried to pretend he wasn't. Milia Ultons mentions that she actually thought Professor Gilda was the suspicious one. Shido Jin dismisses the idea, saying that teacher couldn't pull it off. Watching Milia Ultons, Shido Jin thinks that her emotions are too easy to read on her face, and that she probably is a good person at heart since she doesn't have a double-faced nature. They finally reach the bottom, and Shido Jin says well then as they look out into the cavernous space. Milia Ultons is amazed by the size of the area, stating she never imagined there'd be a space this wide under the academy. Shido Jin stops abruptly and asks, "What is this?" Milia Ultons follows his gaze and asks if he has found something. Shido Jin is visibly stunned, thinking to himself that he never thought he would find it in a place like this. They stand before a massive, high-tech metal door, and he slowly realizes that this is a gateway leading to one of the research labs Kagura had scattered across the world. Shido Jin stands before a gargantuan vault door buried deep beneath the academy. He recognizes it immediately. This is the research facility his old colleague Kagura left behind. Mechanical gears groan as glowing blue patterns flare across the metal surface. The ancient security system is still active, protecting the secrets within with high-level nanomachines. Princess Lai stares at the massive structure in disbelief. She never imagined a facility of this scale could be hidden directly under the school's grounds. Jin steps closer to examine the lock. Lai asks if there's any way inside, and the instructor explains that a specialized access key would normally be required for entry. The princess is confused by the term, so he simplifies it. It's the only object capable of overriding the security and opening the door. He pauses for a moment, his gloved hand moving to his chin as he recalls something important from the recent past. He remembers Hakama Phil, the girl from Kodama village who inherited a similar key. It's highly likely that someone else within the academy holds a duplicate inheritance. Jin's hand begins to glow with a faint, ethereal blue light. If an inherited key is needed, he has a much more direct way of handling the situation. He presses his palm against the cold metal. A holographic interface flickers to life, instantly confirming his identity as the highest-level access authority and initiating the unlock sequence. With a heavy metallic grind, the massive doors begin to separate. A gust of stale, cold air rushes out from the pitch-black void of the facility. As they step inside, Jin's expression hardens. He realizes that whoever is trying to plunge the country into chaos must be the person currently holding the facility's access key. The interior is a nightmare of high-tech cages. Looming in the shadows is a massive, multi-eyed monster, a corroder, locked away behind heavy iron bars. Liz is paralyzed with fear, her hands trembling as she takes in the sight. The idea that such monsters are being kept right beneath her fellow students is terrifying. She turns to the instructor, bewildered by how he bypassed the lock. He just gives a vague answer, claiming that people from his era were simply special. He continues walking into the dark, leaving her with more questions than answers. Liz can't shake the feeling that there's something fundamentally different about the man. She watches him from behind, wondering if his claims of being from 100 million years ago could actually be the truth. Jin stops in front of a cage containing a muscular, lizard-like creature. Despite its appearance, the monster remains eerily still as he observes it. The silence in the laboratory is unsettling. Cages filled with various monsters line the walls, yet none of them are making a sound. He stares into the glowing eyes of the beast. It bothers him that these creatures are being held so peacefully, without any of their usual bloodlust. He moves to the next cage, finding the same result. Not a single corroder shows any sign of the rampaging behavior they are known for. It reminds him of the monsters the bandits had captured earlier. They, too, were kept in cages without putting up a fight. Looking up at a behemoth with dozens of glowing orange eyes, a new question arises. He wonders exactly how anyone could have transported a creature of this size into the facility. He concludes that the academy itself is deeply suspicious. Liz nods, admitting her brother's initial doubts about the school were well-founded. She suggests setting up an ambush right there to catch the mastermind when they return. Jin immediately shuts down the idea. His priority is different. He wants the academy sealed off immediately so they can eliminate these monsters before something goes wrong. Liz is stunned by his lack of interest in the culprit. She asks if he's really willing to just let the person responsible walk away. Jin points up toward the ceiling. He reminds her that the students are directly above them, and they would be the first to die if these creatures were to break loose. He knows how the royal family thinks. Even her brother Reyes would prioritize the lives of the people over the capture of a single traitor. Liz looks down, realizing he's right. Jin sighs, admitting he has an increasingly bad feeling about the current situation. His eyes narrow as he looks back into the depths of the lab. He needs to investigate this place further to uncover the true purpose of the research. He orders Liz to head back, find Argus Walton, and ensure the academy is completely sealed off. She nods firmly, accepting the mission. She sprints away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Jin stands alone in the dark, preparing for whatever comes next. He stops to look at an elaborate astronomical clock mounted on the wall. Its hands are moving in a strange, non-linear fashion. With a final look back, He descends deeper into the facility, hoping to find a clue that explains the true nature of this disaster. The clock face is a masterpiece of ancient engineering, filled with zodiac symbols and shifting blue light. It seems to be counting down to something. Meanwhile, in the main halls of the academy, the atmosphere is far less serious. Students are gathered in groups, whispering and snickering as a teacher walks past. Lord Jita is visibly fuming, his face twisted in a scowl. Behind him, students are openly mocking him, laughing about how easily the new teacher defeated him. Every giggle from the hallway feels like a direct assault on his pride. He's convinced his reputation has been completely destroyed by Jin's arrival. He mutters to himself about his rival's performance, certain that no one could naturally use 8 types of spirit arts. In his mind, the man must be a fraud. His frustration boils over into manic energy. He begins performing bizarre, spastic movements against the wall, swearing to expose the cheating to the world. His strange display is interrupted by a stern voice. The headmaster stands behind him, looking weary as she tells him to stop creeping out the students with his behavior. Jita freezes, staring at her with wide, frantic eyes. She dismisses his outburst as a hobby she has no interest in, leaving him fuming in her wake. The headmaster stops a passing teacher in the courtyard. She asks if he's seen Professor Rudman anywhere, her expression full of concern. Lord Jita rubs his chin thoughtfully. He admits he hasn't seen the man since the entrance ceremony earlier today, which he finds rather troubling. A wave of exhaustion hits the headmaster as she rubs her temple. She had been hopping to discuss the upcoming classes for the new students with him. Her eyes sharpen as she catches sight of something unusual on the horizon. The weary expression is replaced by a look of sudden alertness. High above the academy's spires, a jagged mass of dark purple energy hangs in the evening sky. It looks like a crack in reality, pulsing with an ominous light. Deep within the academy, Princess Liz is sprinting through a dimly lit stone corridor. She's breathless, her face slick with sweat as she rushes to carry out Jin's orders. She bursts through a heavy wooden door, entering a quiet storage room. Her eyes dart around the shadows as she tries to orient herself. Leaning forward with her hand over her heart, she struggles to catch her breath. The silence of the room feels heavy and unnatural compared to the chaos she expects. She tells herself she must hurry and report the laboratory's discovery to her brother, Reyes. The weight of the secret is clearly taking its toll on her. A voice from the darkness suddenly asks what exactly she plans on reporting. Liz freezes, her eyes widening in pure terror as she realizes she's no longer alone. She slowly turns to face the source of the voice. Professor Rudman stands in the shadows, his arms crossed and a smug, superior look on his face. The professor steps forward, his professional facade completely gone. He sports a wide, sinister grin that reveals a predatory nature he's been hiding all along. Back in the hidden underground facility, Shido Jin pushes open a pair of massive double doors. A blinding red glow spills out from the chamber beyond. He stares into the room, his brow furrowed in confusion. He mutters a question to himself, unable to make sense of the sight before him. Dominating the center of the lab is a gargantuan, organic mass hooked up to a network of pipes and cables. It looks like a living heart, raw and pulsing with light. The red sphere thumps rhythmically, the sound echoing through the cold, metal room. It's pulsating as if it were a living, breathing entity. Jin moves to a computer terminal, his fingers hovering over the keys. He wonders if this monstrosity was really something his old colleague Kagura created. He notices a sleek silver briefcase sitting on the console next to the glowing holographic displays. Upon opening the case, he finds 2 items, a glowing message cube and a syringe filled with a bright green nanomachine injector. He activates the cube, and a flicker of blue light begins to materialize. He hopes the message left behind will provide some answers to this madness. A life-sized hologram of Kagura appears, looking exactly as Jin remembers him. The scientist offers a casual greeting, as if he expected Jin to find this place eventually. Kagura notes that it only makes sense Jin would end up here, given the facility's proximity to his awakening site. The scientist explains that they were working on a groundbreaking device within these walls. He sits with a calm, confident posture, hands folded. The focus shifts to the nanomachine injector. Kagura reveals that a portion of the device's core functions has been sealed away inside those very nanomachines. With a smug smirk and a finger to his lips, Kagura brags about his own genius. He challenges Jin to guess the true nature of the invention they were perfecting. Jin's eyes widen in shock as the realization hits him like a physical blow. The words, teleportation device, flicker through his mind. He can barely believe it, repeating the name of the technology under his breath. It's a concept that carries terrifying implications. He looks back at the colossal monster imprisoned behind the bars. The scale of the creature suddenly makes a lot more sense. His gaze returns to the pulsating organic core, and he realizes the horrible truth. He mutters a desperate, "No way," as the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. He looks at the rows of cages filled with quiet, waiting monsters. They aren't just being stored here, they are being prepared for delivery. The silence of the lab is broken only by the steady, mechanical ticking of a clock. The ornate astronomical clock on the wall continues its countdown, its hands inching toward a critical alignment. Jin stands before the pulsating heart, his figure dwarfed by the massive, glowing machinery. The rhythmic thumping seems to be accelerating. A holographic display flickers to life before him, confirming the technical specifications. The reality of the teleportation device is undeniable. A visual diagram explains the concept, connecting two distant points in space instantly. Kagura's voice notes that this technology was impossible to realize even 100 million years ago. Jin recalls the reports Argus Walton gave about monsters appearing out of nowhere in the middle of the capital. The mystery of the invaders is finally solved. He looks back at the red core, his expression grim. He realizes the corroders weren't migrating, they were being beamed directly into the city. He looks at the hologram of Kagura, seeking more information. He needs to know if this was the intended purpose or if the technology has been hijacked. The hologram displays a blue, swirling vortex, the portal generated by the teleportation device. Jin's confusion deepens as he studies the technical data. He notes that the version in front of him looks fundamentally different from Kagura's original design. He stares at the pulsating red mass, a sense of dread washing over him. He wonders what kind of corruption has turned a transport device into this organic nightmare. A sharp mechanical clack echoes through the room as the clock hand hits the final marker. The time for investigation has officially run out. The red core of the teleportation device pulses one last time before detonating in a sphere of pure, white radiance. Shido Jin is forced to shield his eyes as the laboratory is consumed by the overwhelming light. The sound of the machine's final activation fills the room. Inside the storage cages, the captive corroders are swept up in the same energy. They begin to shimmer and fade as the teleportation process takes hold. A massive, multi-eyed monster dissolves into glowing particles, its physical form being converted into data for transport. A pillar of blinding red and white light erupts from the facility, punching through the earth and soaring into the evening sky. Outside in the academy courtyard, Hakama Phil sprints toward Argus Walton. She shouts that the royal capital is in the midst of a sudden, catastrophic emergency. Argus stares up at the sky, his face pale with dread. He tells her he already knows, his eyes fixed on the horrific sight above. The sky has turned a bruised purple, and hundreds of monsters are raining down on the capital's rooftops, transported directly into the heart of the city. Back in the library, Liz stands her ground against Professor Rudman. The professor mockingly asks why she's looking at him with such a stern and accusing expression. He leans in, a cruel glint in his eyes. He addresses her by her full title, Lady Ultons, with a tone that suggests he no longer fears her authority. Liz commands him to step aside, her voice trembling with rage as she accuses him of being a collaborator in the attack. Golden energy begins to spark at her fingertips. Rudman chuckles, confirming her suspicions. He admits that he's noticed her sniffing around the school's secrets for quite some time now. Liz's breath hitches as the full scale of the betrayal sinks in. She realizes the enemy wasn't just at the gates, but within the faculty itself. With a broad, villainous grin, Rudman declares that today is the day their long-awaited plan finally moves into the execution phase. Distant screams echo through the halls. He explains that the invasion was originally meant to happen later, but Lai's interference forced him to accelerate the timeline. He stares at her with a predator's intensity, his eyes reflecting the cold calculations of a man who has already won. Deep in the underground tunnels, Shido Jin is sprinting toward the exit. Rudman's voiceover notes that the silver-haired man has become far too much of a threat to ignore. Jin rounds a corner, his long coat snapping in the wind of his own speed. Rudman considers him just as much of a nuisance as Lai's brother Reyes. Rudman gestures toward the dark, hidden stairwell behind him. He reveals that Jin has already discovered the secret research facility. Lais looks on in shock as the professor explains his intent to nip the seeds of anxiety in the bud by eliminating everyone who knows too much. Lais braces herself for a fight, her hands glowing with light magic. She internally questions if she has the strength to defeat a seasoned mage like Rudman. Rudman lets out a boisterous laugh, his face contorted with arrogance as he prepares to unleash his power. He boasts about the invincible power he's acquired, unaware that Hakama Phil and another student are creeping up behind him with a massive ceramic pot. Lai's combat stance falters as she stares in utter confusion at the bizarre scene unfolding behind her enemy. Rudman continues his grand monologue about his new power, completely oblivious to the shadow looming over him. With a heavy thud, the giant clay pot smashes directly onto Rudman's head, shattering into a dozen pieces. Lai stands frozen, her mouth agape as she watches the formidable villain crumble to the floor in a heap. Hakama Phil lets out a long, weary sigh and wipes the sweat from her brow, looking satisfied with her unorthodox attack. Hakama stands triumphantly over the unconscious professor, whose eyes have rolled back into his head. She simply declares that she's won the encounter. Lais finally finds her voice and asks what they are doing here. Hakama explains that they were frantically searching for Jin. Through the library window, the girls watch as pillars of smoke rise from the burning city. Hakama emphasizes that they need Jin's strength to deal with the chaos. Kyudo Prutsa steps forward, looking small and nervous. Hakama adds that Kyudo was the one who saw Jin entering this specific part of the building. Lais looks down at the younger girl and asks if she's a freshman. Kyudo bows deeply, introducing herself with a stuttering, formal greeting. Kyudo looks at the teacher's prone body and asks with a worried expression if it was really okay to knock out a member of the staff. Hakama dismisses the concern with a casual wave. Hakama jokes that since their faces weren't seen, they can just blame the whole thing on this lady here, pointing at Lais. Lais snaps back, telling the potato girl to show some respect. The sound of heavy footsteps echoes up the secret stairwell as someone approaches at high speed. Hakama turns her head, her ears twitching as she focuses on the sound coming from the hidden door. Shido Jin bursts out of the secret passage, his eyes immediately landing on the unconscious Professor Rudman. He asks for a quick explanation of what happened. Hakama rushes to his side, explaining that the situation outside has descended into complete madness. Jin simply nods, having already pieced it together. Jin's expression turns grave as he looks back at the stairwell. He reports that every single one of the monsters held in the research facility has vanished. Lai's eyes widen in horror as she realizes the terrifying implication of his words. Realizing there is no time to lose, the group of 4 sprints out of the academy and toward the battle raging in the capital. The royal capital is a landscape of fire and ruin. Billowing black smoke chokes the sunset sky as explosions rock the foundations of the city. Panic-stricken citizens flee for their lives through the narrow streets. A hulking, lupin beast with rows of jagged teeth looms over a fallen man, its eyes glowing with predatory hunger. From the sky, a massive winged predator swoops down and snatches a civilian from the ground. Below, a young beastman girl and other residents scream in terror as they scramble to avoid the same fate. The ground tremors under the weight of a colossal invader. A massive, taloned foot slams into the cobblestones, pulverizing the stone and sending a shockwave through the alleyway. A gargantuan corroder towers above the rooftops, its muscular frame studded with pulsating yellow orbs of energy. In the distance, the spires of the royal castle stand as the monster's next target. The creature's face is a mass of writhing tentacles and multiple glowing eyes. It lets out a deep, resonant rumble that vibrates through the very air. The corroder unhinges its jaw, revealing a cavernous mouth lined with rows of needle-like teeth. A blinding light begins to coalesce deep within its throat. Lies watches from a distance, her face pale and her hands trembling. She cries out in despair as she witnesses the systematic destruction of her home. Shido Jin stands on the edge of a high vantage point, his eyes fixed on the unfolding catastrophe. He grits his teeth in frustration, regretting his decision not to destroy the teleportation device the moment he found it. Beside him, Hakama Phil leans over the railing and points urgently toward the center of the city. She shouts for Jin to look at the massive threat looming over the capital. The giant monster stands at the heart of the destruction, the air around it rippling with the sheer force of its gathered energy. With a deafening roar, the corroder unleashes a concentrated beam of white-hot energy from its mouth, aimed directly at the seat of power. The beam lances across the sky, its brilliance casting long, flickering shadows over the burning city. The target is clear, the royal castle itself. Lies and Kudo Prutsa cling to the balcony rail, their eyes wide with terror. Lies realizes that if the blast connects, the royal family and the heart of the kingdom will be lost. Shido Jin remains unnervingly calm despite the chaos. He pulls a specialized syringe from his coat, admitting his error and vowing to put an end to the crisis himself. He plunges the needle into his forearm, injecting a glowing serum into his bloodstream. Instantly, his body is wreathed in crackling blue arcs of electricity as he activates a simplified version of the teleportation technology. A memory of Kagura flashes through his mind, the scientist warning him that the energy stored in the nanomachines is finite. The high-level function can only be used once per day. The monster's beam continues its path of destruction, carving through the air. The voice of his mentor echoes in his head, reminding him that the teleportation is limited to his line of sight. The energy beam closes the distance to the castle tower, the heat and pressure already beginning to crack the ancient stone. Just as the beam is about to strike, a vertical rift of shimmering blue light tears open in the sky. Shido Jin materializes from the rift in midair, placing himself directly in the path of the incoming devastation. With a sharp movement of his hand, Jin deploys a massive barrier of hexagonal energy shields. The monster's beam slams into the defense with a world-shaking impact, creating a blinding explosion of light as he holds the line. The royal capital is under a massive, unprovoked attack as corruptors rain from the sky, setting the city ablaze and forcing citizens to run for their lives. Inside the guild headquarters, a young guild clerk sprints down the hallway, her expression filled with urgency. She bursts into the office, shouting for the guild master and reporting that a giant corruptor has just breached the outer walls. Hardin Gunslot, the royal capital guild master, stands by the window with his back to the room. He watches the chaos outside with a silent, heavy heart. He turns, his scarred face looking tired as he admits there's nothing more they can do to stop the monster. Out in the streets, soldiers are desperately helping civilians evacuate while fires gut the buildings behind them. A holy knight slashes through one of the smaller creatures, but Hardin notes that even the knights are hopelessly outnumbered. The clerk asks what he means. Hardin explains the dire situation. Half of the holy knight forces are currently away from the capital on a different mission. The news leaves her stunned, her mouth hanging open as she realizes they've been left wide open. Outside, the giant corruptor smashes through a defensive wall, its massive, multi-eyed form looming over the city like a living nightmare. The beast unhinges its jaw, charging a blast of energy in its throat. Hardin realizes this wasn't a random attack, it's a cold, premeditated strike. He grits his teeth, knowing they might have stood a chance if the Grand Commander were here. Now they're just waiting for the end. A sudden, brilliant pillar of blue light tears through the sky, striking the center of the monster's blast and holding it back. Hardin stares out the window, completely taken aback by the unexpected intervention. He can barely believe his eyes, as the destructive energy is neutralized by a single person. Shido Jin stands on a distant rooftop, surrounded by glowing hexagonal shields as he effortlessly redirects the raw power. From the safety of the guild office, the clerk peers out, her eyes widening as she recognizes the white-haired hero. She realizes exactly who it is, the mysterious person from Kodama village who everyone has been talking about. The giant corruptor groans as smoke rises from its charred body, though it's still standing after the massive blast. Jin lands on a nearby ledge, his black coat fluttering in the wind as he prepares his next move. Blue energy swirls around his hands as he focuses his nanomachines, ready to take the fight to the next level. He fires a concentrated beam of light directly at the monster's head, the sheer force of it cracking the stone beneath his feet. The blast connects with a deafening roar, blowing a chunk out of the creature's shoulder and sending debris flying. Jin remains calm, his teal eyes tracking the monster's every twitch through the smoke and dust. The giant corruptor is heavily damaged, but its massive size makes it hard to kill with just energy blasts. Jin watches from across the rooftops, calculating his next move as the beast's flesh begins to knit back together. He wipes sweat from his brow, realizing that the previous teleportation drained more of his energy reserves than he anticipated. He knows things won't be simple this time, so he decides to switch to a more direct approach. A shimmering blue blade manifests in his hand as he decides to settle this with close-quarters combat. He lunges forward, his sword leaving a trail of blue light as he slashes a massive arc through the air. Multiple deep cuts appear on the monster's hide as Jin strikes with blinding speed, not giving the beast a moment to breathe. He doesn't stop for a second, diving back into the fray to keep the pressure on. Jin moves like a blur, appearing in multiple places at once as he carves into the giant corruptor's legs and torso. "Focus," he tells himself, his gaze sharpening as he looks for a single, lethal opening in the monster's defenses. He knows that a simple attack will just allow the beast to regenerate immediately, so he needs to buy enough time for a finishing move. Using his nanomachines, he manipulates gravity to nullify his own body weight, allowing him to move with weightless grace. He kicks off a wooden beam, atmospheric pressure manipulation generating a localized wind to give him a massive speed boost. He swoops down toward the monster's core, atmospheric pressure bending around his blade for maximum impact. In another part of the city, a smaller monster pins down a wolf-eared soldier, its jaws snapping inches from his face as he desperately holds it back. Suddenly, a massive fireball streaks across the sky toward the creature. The beast explodes in a burst of flame, saving the soldier just as he was about to be overwhelmed. Two students from Harnisk Academy step forward to join the battle, ready to back up the city's defenders. A cat-eared soldier desperately parries a monster's claw with his spear, shouting a word of gratitude to someone nearby. Behind him, two fellow Beastman students prepare for the next wave, nodding that the royal capital is in a serious pinch. The trio faces off against a pair of incoming monsters, including a red spider-like creature and a hulking green humanoid. A black boot slams into the stone street with enough force to kick up a cloud of dust. Shido Jin arrives like a lightning bolt, his blade glowing with blue energy as he carves straight through the green monster. The three students can only stare in absolute shock as the threat that was about to kill them is eliminated in a split second. One of them stammers, barely able to process that a human, someone they viewed as an inferior species, is this powerful. Jin doesn't wait for a thank you, sprinting immediately toward the giant corruptor to close the distance before it can regenerate. The massive, multi-eyed beast lets out a roar that shakes the very foundations of the city. Jin narrows his eyes as a sudden wave of dark energy erupts from the monster, forcing him to react. He leaps high into the air, his black coat fluttering as he prepares a heavy strike from above. He remains perfectly composed, his teal eyes glowing as he decides the monster is no longer a significant threat. Jin dives through a cluster of monsters, his blade leaving a trail of brilliant blue light as it slices through anything in its path. Landing amidst the wreckage, he prepares for the final push, determined to end the battle before the giant can strike again. He pushes his speed to the absolute limit, moving so fast that he becomes a series of silver afterimages dancing through the chaos. The giant corruptor looms over the rooftops, its massive tentacles lashing out in a desperate attempt to swat the intruder. Jin stomps the ground, catapulting himself directly at the creature. He lunges forward, his blade crackling with energy as he focuses all his power into a single, wide-range attack. The giant corruptor is caught directly in the path of the devastating strike, its massive form beginning to crumble. High above, Argus Walton and his fellow knights watch the battle in stunned silence, unable to believe what they're seeing. Liz and her fellow students can only stare from the sidelines, their faces pale as they witness the sheer scale of Jin's power. Jin leaps one last time, soaring high above the city as he prepares the final blow. He unleashes a flurry of lightning-fast slashes that carve deep wounds into the monster's massive torso. The giant corruptor howls in agony, its many yellow eyes blinking frantically as the blue energy begins to incinerate it from within. From the ground, Jin looks like a tiny silhouette against the massive creature, holding his glowing blade toward the sky. He dives straight into the center of the beast, becoming a human bullet of pure, concentrated blue energy. A mana spear condenses in his hand as he whispers a cold farewell, declaring that this is finally the end. A massive pillar of blue light erupts from the center of the monster, incinerating its entire body in a blinding flash. The column of energy roars toward the sky, completely engulfing the giant corruptor as it dissolves into nothing but ash. The explosion is so massive it lights up the entire capital, serving as a beacon of hope for everyone still trapped in the city. As the light fades, the giant monster is gone, replaced only by a massive crater and a cloud of lingering dust. From the guild office, Hardin Gunslot and the clerk watch the aftermath, their mouths agape in total silence. Hardin tries to find the words to describe what just happened, but the sheer scale of the power has left him completely speechless. Shido Jin lands on a nearby rooftop, calmly sheathing his blade as the smoke from the battle drifts past him. He looks back over the city one last time, his cold teal eyes showing no emotion as the people below whisper in awe. 3 days pass, and the royal capital is already well on its way to recovery, with reconstruction crews working around the clock. From his dormitory window, Jin watches the busy citizens below, observing how quickly they've returned to their daily lives. He stretches and reflects on the chaos, nodding that despite the massive scale of the attack, the damage was remarkably contained. He gives credit to the Holy Knights, acknowledging that their capability and quick response saved countless lives. The Knights had been on high alert, efficiently managing the smaller threats while the main battle raged in the city's center. Karina and her fellow Knights worked tirelessly to clean up the remaining mess and ensure the city's safety. Even Harnisk Academy was placed under a strict cordon for investigation, with Knights standing guard at every entrance. Professor Rudman is marched through the city, his hands clamped in heavy iron shackles, and his gaze fixed on the ground as the suspected mastermind of the siege. Other lecturers and the elderly headmaster are also rounded up by the Holy Knights, their faces reflecting the gravity of the interrogation currently underway in the capital. Shido Jin lies sprawled on his bed, hands tucked behind his silver hair as he sighs over the academy's sudden closure after just a single day of enrollment. He stares upward with a thoughtful expression, his teal eyes distant as he processes the new strategic hurdle that the monster attack revealed to him. He visualizes the chaos of battle, the corruptors spreading out across the terrain, and realizes that his high-output attacks are wasted if the enemies are too far apart. Pushing himself up to sit on the edge of the mattress, Jin clenches his jaw, driven by the realization that his current strength is still not enough to ensure everyone's safety. He holds his hand out, watching as a lattice of glowing blue energy forms into a perfect cube above his palm, the flickering light reflecting in his determined eyes. Shido Jin sits in his dormitory, looking out at the city as the sun shines through the window. He hears a sharp knock on his door. He stands up and pulls the door open, ready for whatever visitor might be bothering him. To his surprise, he finds Milia Ulton standing there, dressed in a lavish, frilly gown and bowing deeply. She's gone through a complete transformation from her usual academy uniform. She looks up with a blush and a sweet smile, calling him Master, in a voice that's anything but her usual condescending tone. Jin is taken aback by the sudden shift, especially since he thought the academy was on break. Milia explains that her elder brother is calling for him. She says her brother wants to formally thank him for his help with the recent incident. Apparently, there's another matter he wants to discuss as well. Jin steps out into the hallway, asking why someone like her came all this way just to summon him herself. Milia maintains her polite facade, saying that sending a mere servant to summon someone as great as him would be far too rude. She strikes a pose, hands on her hips and head held high, claiming she spent time reflecting on her actions as a representative of the Ultons family. Jin isn't buying the act for a second and bluntly asks if she's done calling him an inferior species now. Milia goes into a dramatic speech about how one shouldn't judge people by appearances and should show respect to everyone. She begs to receive his guidance and discipline as his disciple, while another visitor, Hakama Phil, watches from the doorway with a skeptical look. Hakama chimes in, saying she was bored at the dorms and decided to drop by for a visit. The sight of the country bumpkin clearly grates on Milia, who hides her annoyance behind her fan while internally fuming. Milia thinks about how brazen Hakama is for barging in, and Jin points out that she's already failing her reflection promise. They eventually move on, arriving at the massive and ornate Argus mansion. The mansion staff are lined up at the entrance, bowing respectfully as they welcome Milia back home. Among the staff are Poful and Shandy, the orphans Jin rescued, who now look well-fed and professional in their uniforms. Jin greets them, noticing they seem to have gotten used to the work here already. They thank him with bright smiles. He checks in on them, asking if they were hurt during the monster attack the other day. They tell him that everyone at the mansion was incredibly strong and protected them, showing a brief glimpse of the staff in action. Seeing their cheerful expressions, Jin is relieved to see they're being well treated in their new home. He asks who they've been hearing about his exploits from, and they mention both Milia and Lord Argus Walton. Milia snaps her fan shut and gleefully claims that spreading word of her master's greatness is her natural duty as a disciple. She turns to the children, telling them that if they're the same race as Jin, they should strive to follow his example. As they walk, Shandy whispers to Jin that Milia used to be incredibly strict with them until just recently. He adds that she's become quite a bit kinder lately, leaving Jin to wonder about the sudden change in her personality. The group reaches a set of large, ornate double doors at the end of a grand hallway. Poful knocks on the door and announces that she has brought Shido Jin as requested. Jin enters a dimly lit sitting room where Argus Walton and Hardin Gunslot are waiting for him. Hardin looks over with a stern and focused expression, his arms crossed over his chest. The children bow and leave, closing the door behind them as Jin stands before the two leaders. Argus Walton, the blonde holy knight, welcomes Jin and apologizes for the sudden summons. He gestures toward the man sitting next to him, preparing to introduce the guild master. The focus shifts to Hardin Gunslot, whose scarred face and wolf ears give him a rugged, intimidating appearance. Hardin stands up and shakes Jin's hand, formally introducing himself as the guild master of the royal capital. He admits that he witnessed Jin's incredible performance during the recent crisis and was deeply impressed. Hardin reflects on the giant corruptor, nodding that the country would have been lost if Jin hadn't intervened. To Jin's surprise, the powerful guildmaster bows his head low in a sincere gesture of gratitude for saving the nation. Jin remains composed and humble, simply stating that he only took down the largest threat among many. Argus chimes in, suggesting that if thanks are to be given, they should also go to the holy knights who managed the aftermath. Hardin watches Jin closely, nodding his lack of greed and wondering what his true intentions might be. Jin sits on the couch, looking at the two leaders across from him while Milia and Hakama watch from behind. He asks if they've said everything they needed to say. Argus Walton shakes his head, leaning forward slightly. He explains that because of the scale of the recent incident, the royal family itself has requested a meeting with Jin. A sharp focus on Jin's teal eye shows him processing this development. Argus adds that before any such meeting can happen, there's a vital clarification he needs to make. Hardin Gunslot takes the lead, his expression stern as he asks the question directly. Who exactly are you? Hardin explains that his guild has members stationed in every corner of the country, ensuring no information escapes his reach. He admits that he's already had Jin investigated, only to find that there is absolutely no record of his existence anywhere in this land. Argus joins in, his tone making it clear that he expects total honesty this time without any room for evasion. In the background, Milia and Hakama look on with visible anxiety as the interrogation intensifies. Argus demands to know where Jin actually came from. He narrows his eyes, questioning what Jin's true purpose was for coming to this country in the first place. Jin remains calm under the heavy pressure as Argus waits patiently for an answer that makes sense. The room falls silent as the two high-ranking officials stare Jin down, demanding to know the truth behind his sudden appearance. Argus's gaze is unwavering, his posture reflecting the authority of a holy knight commander. Jin sighs and brushes a hand through his silver-white hair, looking more weary than defensive. He tells them plainly that he wasn't actually trying to hide anything. He explains that he simply kept quiet because he didn't think anyone would actually believe the truth, even if he told them. To his surprise, Argus maintains a small smile and promises that if the words come from Jin, he is prepared to believe them. Jin's expression softens slightly, appreciative of the knight's blunt willingness to trust him. He finally drops the bombshell, revealing that he is actually a human who has lived for over 100 million years. The revelation leaves both leaders stunned. Jin adds that he is the one known as the Taboo of Kodama village, further cementing his impossible identity. Argus is visibly sweating as the pieces click into place. He realizes that Jin is the legendary human who had been slumbering behind the sealed door for eons. Hardin rubs his chin, admitting that while the story is hard to wrap his head around, he finds himself believing it nonetheless. Milia beams with pride, internally gloating about how her teacher was the one to open the ancient door in the academy's underground that was supposed to stay shut. She recalls the massive, imposing metal vault door that Jin managed to bypass with ease. Milia speaks up, reminding the men that her brother and his knights have all witnessed Jin's overwhelming power firsthand. Argus looks back at his sister, his face still pale from the shock of the truth she's so casually confirming. Despite the tension, Milia looks absolutely delighted to be associated with such a legendary figure, while Argus struggles to maintain his composure. Jin leans back, explaining that he had been sleeping in an underground facility right here in this nation for all those millions of years. He clarifies that his primary reason for traveling to the royal capital was simply to gather information and catch up on the current state of the world. Hardin leans in, crossing his arms and asking what specific kind of information Jin was hoping to find. Jin holds up a single finger, stating that there are two main things he's looking for. The first is more information on the creatures they call corruptors. He leaves the two men completely speechless by revealing that those same monsters existed back in his era, 100 million years ago. Jin Shido stares forward with a cold, piercing gaze. He explains that under normal circumstances, these creatures shouldn't even be walking the earth in this era. Across the table, Argus and Hardin listen as the gravity of the story settles in. Argus asks for an explanation, and the answer is simple. It's all tied to the ancient power of spirits. Jin takes them back 100 million years, describing a world where spirits were harnessed through massive, complex towers spread across every continent. These colossal machines were the lifeblood of the old world, glowing with a constant, humming blue energy. Blasts of pure light shot directly into the sky, cutting through the atmosphere with incredible force. From deep space, the planet was a web of glowing lines as that energy blanketed the entire globe. The conversation shifts to the corruptors, grotesque monsters that thrive only in the most toxic and polluted corners of the world. But the spirits acted as a natural cleanser, raining down from the sky like glowing shards to purify the land and incinerate anything tainted. Hardin leans in, puzzled as to why these monsters are still around today. Jin admits that even with his knowledge, the finer details are still a mystery. He shifts slightly in his seat, his expression as unreadable as ever. Jin activates his cube, projecting a sharp blue hologram into the air. He reveals that according to an old contact of his, these corruptors aren't just lingering, they're actively evolving. The sight of the advanced technology leaves Hardin sweating, his eyes wide with shock. He can barely wrap his head around the fact that he's looking at a literal relic of an ancient civilization. The old wolfman stares at the interface, trying to comprehend the logic behind such a complex system. Jin just shakes his head. He doesn't have the answers either. That mystery is exactly why he's made his way to the royal capital in the first place. He intends to dig through the city's archives to see how people have been fighting these things, hoping some useful records survived the ages. But his real mission goes deeper. He's also tracking down clues about the ancient laboratories that were scattered across the world long ago. He drops a bombshell. One of those very labs is buried directly beneath the city they're in right now, built by his own friend. While he tells them he's searching the world for these sites, he keeps the best part to himself. Those labs hold the key to restoring his original power. He settles back, adjusting his gloves as his eyes turn sharp and focused. Everything he's doing serves a single, ultimate goal: to wipe the corruptors off the face of the planet for good. The heavy mood in the room is broken as a maid and a young boy arrive at the door to check on them. Hardin lets out a long breath, calling it a wild story. Argus sits back, the weight of the revelation finally sinking in. Despite the insanity of it all, the blonde knight gives a confident smile. He decides to trust the story, knowing they both share the same desire to stop the corruptors. He warns Jin to be careful, though. Telling a tale like that to the wrong person is a quick way to get labeled a lunatic. Jin gives a slight, knowing smirk. He knows exactly how he sounds to someone from this era. Argus looks over at Hardin to see where he stands. The old lord doesn't hesitate. If the knight believes him, then he's on board too. He looks at Jin with newfound respect, nodding that someone with bad intentions wouldn't have risked their life to defend the castle like he did. A sharp knock at the door brings their private conversation to an abrupt end. The maid enters with a young boy in tow, politely interrupting to let them know that their scheduled appointment is drawing near. Hardin stands up, surprised that time has slipped away so quickly while they were talking. Argus looks back at Jin with a teasing grin, clearly having some sort of plan in mind. The protagonist just stares back, a question mark practically floating over his head as he wonders what they're up to. Outside, the heavy wheels of a royal carriage begin to turn, grinding against the stone pavement of the estate. The white and gold carriage rumbles toward the distant, towering spires of the royal palace under a clear blue sky. Beside the carriage, Jin catches his reflection in the mirror. He has been dressed in formal military attire for his royal audience. He grumbles to himself about why he even had to change clothes. Argus sits across from him, looking quite amused. He tells Jin the outfit actually suits him surprisingly well. He mentions that the girls back at the mansion were all praises, but Jin just sighs. To him, the clothes are stiff and a total pain to move around in. Hardin cuts through the small talk, explaining that they'll be meeting the first prince. Since the king is sick, the prince is currently acting as his representative. Jin just stares ahead, his expression flat. To him, all this royal formality is just one giant hassle he'd rather avoid. The carriage rolls through the massive stone gates of the inner palace. Jin can only hope he doesn't get dragged into some fresh batch of trouble. But as they arrive, they are greeted by rows of elite royal guards. Among them are the 3rd Division leader and the massive, bull-like commander Wassa, all standing at grim attention. Hardin leads the way into the grand hall, announcing that he's brought the hero who saved the kingdom from its latest crisis. Jin, Shido, and Argus follow closely behind, walking down the long red carpet. From the high throne, a cold voice rings out, commanding them to raise their heads. The atmosphere in the room is heavy with the weight of royal authority. Jin Shido looks up, his expression remaining stoic and unbothered despite the formal setting. Behind him, Argus stays in a respectful kneel, his eyes cast downward. The protagonist takes in the scene, his ice blue eyes sharp as he finally comes face to face with the ruling power of this era. Standing before a massive, stained glass window is the first prince, Tails Kermosia. He cuts an imposing figure with his long blonde hair and sweeping royal cape, silhouetted against the bright light. Jin maintains his composure, greeting the prince with a simple introduction. Tails watches him from the top of the stairs, a faint, unreadable hum escaping his lips. The prince explains that since his father is bedridden, he is acting as the crown's representative. He offers a shallow word of thanks, telling Jin he's done well in defending the capital. Tails notes that according to Hardin, Jin hails from the tiny settlement of Kodama village. Jin and his allies remain kneeling, listening as the royal continues his assessment. The prince's tone shifts as he mentions it's surprising to find someone of Jin's talent coming from such a small, insignificant place. Jin's eyes narrow slightly at the backhanded compliment. A sharp, predatory smile crosses Tails' face as he decides to drop the pleasantries and speak plainly. The facade of gratitude is quickly beginning to crack. He looks down at Jin with a gaze full of arrogance, delivering a blunt command. "Serve me!" He expects absolute obedience from the man he just called a hero. Tails declares that Jin will become a holy knight of the country, working himself to the bone for the state's benefit. Jin stares up at him, his silence speaking volumes. The prince repeats his demand, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. He expects Jin to be grateful for the honor of being a royal servant. He leans in, his crimson eyes flashing with a mix of greed and control. He makes it clear that he expects Jin to devote his entire life to the throne. Jin Shido's expression turns cold, his glowing eyes fixed on the man above him. The tension in the air is thick enough to choke on. Tails lets out a mocking laugh, asking if something is wrong. He's growing impatient, waiting for the answer he considers inevitable. Hardin starts to speak up, reminding the prince that they were the ones who invited Jin here. He looks worried, realizing the audience is going south fast. Hardin pleads with Tails not to force the issue, his hands gesturing desperately. He knows that trying to chain a man like Jin is a dangerous game. Jin finally breaks his silence, stating flatly that he doesn't plan on staying in this country for long. He places a hand on his chest, his gaze unwavering. He mentions his current work at the academy is only temporary. He has no interest in the prince's offer or the political chains that come with it. The prince's eyes narrow, his expression darkening. He asks one final time to confirm the refusal, his voice low and dangerous. When Jin confirms his choice, the prince's demeanor completely flips. A dark, ominous bubble of text appears. He's decided that if he can't own the hero, he'll destroy him. The sound of heavy boots and clashing steel fills the hall. Squads of royal knights move in with lightning speed, their blades drawn and ready. In an instant, Jin and his allies are surrounded by a circle of swords. Tails stands at the top of the stairs, a cruel smirk on his lips as he gives the order to seize him. Hardin and Argus watch in horror as the prince's guards move in to surround them. The sudden betrayal catches the village's defenders completely off guard. Tails Kermosia looks down from his pedestal with a cold, hollow expression. He drops the facade of gratitude and brands Jin a traitor who is plotting to overthrow the entire state. An image of the massive, sealed ancient door flashes through the room, a relic of the world's deep history. The prince uses its existence as the foundation for his manufactured lie. High above the hall, Tails looms over his subjects like a god of judgment. He claims that Jin was the one who broke the seal on that door, letting out a corruptor to destabilize the kingdom. A twisted smile tugs at the prince's lips as he leans into the performance. He even suggests that Jin's heroic defense of the capital was nothing more than a self-staged act to gain public favor. Hardin's face contorts with a mix of fury and pure shock at the blatant fabrication. The sheer audacity of the accusation leaves the veteran lord nearly speechless. Jin Shido remains perfectly still, his eyes narrowing as he absorbs the situation. He doesn't offer a defense, he simply waits, watching the man who thinks he has him cornered. Tails muses aloud that a power like Jin's would be a terrible thing to waste on the gallows. He hints that he might have been willing to overlook the crime if only Jin had agreed to become his servant. The prince's arrogance reaches a fever pitch as he offers a sinister, toothy grin. He frames the coming violence as an unfortunate necessity brought on by Jin's refusal to submit. Argus bows his head, the weight of his failure pressing down on his shoulders. He finally realizes the scale of the trap they've walked into. Sweat beads on the knight's brow as he connects the dots of the heavy security presence. He realizes that even his own presence was likely calculated as part of the prince's endgame. The 3rd Division leader watches the scene with a predatory gaze, her lips curled into a smirk. She and her division are clearly the ones holding the leash on this entire setup. A goat-tiered beastman of high rank, she stands firm as the leader of the 3rd Division. Her fanatical loyalty to the First Prince is the only law she recognizes in this hall. Beside her stands Commander Wasser of the 4th Division, a massive bull-like man with a frame built for war. He is the iron fist that enforces the prince's shifting whims. Argus looks between them, knowing these commanders would gladly trample over any sense of justice to please their royal master. The realization is a bitter pill for a man of his honor. The prince's intent was never to negotiate. It was to break Jin or dispose of him entirely. The image of a man rotting behind bars was always the intended outcome. Dozens of elite knights form a ring around Jin, their spears creating a forest of sharp, cold steel. From the top of the stairs, Tails watches his prey with the confidence of a man who has already won. He extends a gloved hand toward Jin, the gesture dripping with a fake, condescending mercy. He offers a single, final path out of the death sentence he just created. "Swear loyalty to me," Tails commands, his crimson eyes glowing with a dark, hungry entitlement. He wants to own the ultimate weapon and use it to carve his name into history. An oppressive silence hangs over the grand hall as every eye is fixed on the silver-haired man at the center. The tension is so thick it feels like the air itself might snap. Jin keeps his head down, his face shrouded in shadow. He quietly admits that he doesn't understand the logic behind the prince's demand. The prince's eyebrow twitches in annoyance at the unexpected response. Jin asks what possible meaning a forced verbal oath could have in a situation like this. Argus and Hardin watch as Jin lays out the cold reality. Words are just air. If he were to give his word under duress and run away later, the oath would be utterly worthless. One of Jin's eyes flashes with a piercing blue light as he stares through the prince. He calls out the royal's base desire to satisfy a petty, childish need for control. Surrounded by a sea of hostile weapons, Jin remains the calmest person in the room. He continues to dissect the prince's motivations as if he were explaining a simple scientific concept. Tails' face twists into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage as the truth hits him like a slap. He isn't used to being analyzed and found wanting by those he considers inferior. Commander Wassa lunges forward, the tip of his spear stopping just inches from Jin's throat. Jin doesn't even move an inch. He simply tells the massive commander to be silent. The bull beastman is stunned by the commoner's gall, shouting at him for daring to speak back. He prepares to run Jin through for the perceived insult to his rank. Jin reaches out and catches the spear mid-thrust, his fingers closing around the shaft with casual precision. He tells them all to listen, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. His gloved hand tightens, and the metal of the weapon groans under the pressure. The look in Jin's eyes makes it clear that he isn't the one who should be afraid. Wassa strains with all his might, his face turning red as he tries to pull his spear away. To his mounting horror, the weapon won't budge. It's as if it's been anchored into a mountain. Jin's foot comes down on the floor with a dull, heavy thud. The sudden shift in his stance signals the end of the conversation and the beginning of the lesson. With the strength of a god, Jin easily manhandles the massive bull beastman using nothing but the leverage on his own spear. The other knights can only watch in stunned disbelief. Commander Wassa is flipped into the air like a toy, his heavy armor clanking as he slammed down onto the hard stone floor. The impact is so violent that the entire hall seems to tremble. A cloud of dust and steam rises from the impact, and the sound of cracking stone echoes through the silence. Jin looks down at his fallen opponent with a gaze colder than ice. Prince Tails stands frozen, his mouth slightly agape as his strongest commander is neutralized in a single, effortless motion. The reality of Jin's power is finally starting to sink in. Argus clutches his head, his face pale with dread. He knew Jin was strong, but he never imagined the man would openly humiliate the kingdom's military elite. The 3rd Division leader steps out from the crowd, her hand outstretched as she tries to weave a spell. She shouts at Jin, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and desperation. Her eyes go wide as she realizes her spirit magic won't respond to her call. It's as if the very air around Jin has become a void where mystical power simply ceases to exist. Panic takes over as she realizes her greatest weapon is useless, and she frantically screams for the rest of the knights to seize him. The hall erupts into a chaotic scramble of steel. A royal knight tries to exploit the distraction, lunging forward with a desperate thrust of his spear. He hopes that raw numbers will be enough to overcome the monster in the room. Jin doesn't even draw his sword. He just delivers a blindingly fast kick that catches the knight square in the chest. The soldier is launched backward with the force of a cannonball. Jin casually adjusts his glove, his movements calm and deliberate despite the dozens of spears leveled at him. He doesn't look like a man under arrest. He looks like a predator waiting for the right moment. With a single, fluid motion, he sweeps his arm across the air, unleashing a massive crescent-shaped wave of blue energy. The force is overwhelming, tossing the surrounding knights into the air like they were nothing more than autumn leaves. From the safety of the stairs, Tails Kermoja screams at Hardin to join the fray. His face is a mask of frantic desperation as he realizes his elite guards are being dismantled by a single commoner. Argus watches the chaos with a grim, conflicted expression, his hand hovering over the hilt of his sword. He stays silent, his eyes fixed on the man who just redefined what it means to be a human. Hardin stands his ground, his arms crossed as he watches the spectacle with a deep, knowing frown. Behind him, Argus prepares to fulfill his duty, his face etched with the weight of the impossible choice he has to make. Argus draws his blade with a trembling hand, sweat beads rolling down his face. He tells Jin not to take what's about to happen personally, forced to choose his loyalty to the crown over his respect for the hero. Tails Kermoja erupts into a fit of manic, high-pitched laughter that echoes through the grand hall. He declares that it doesn't matter if Jin is captured alive or dead, as long as the ultimate weapon is contained. The prince points a trembling finger at the center of the hall, screaming for his men to capture the intruder at any cost. The audience hall has become a slaughterhouse of ego and steel. Jin stands at the epicenter of the carnage, a crackling aura of blue energy and thick smoke swirling around him. The pressure of his presence is so immense that it seems to be warping the very light in the room. A massive pillar of brilliant blue light erupts from the floor, blinding everyone in the hall. The knights can only shield their eyes in shock as their target simply vanishes into thin air right before their eyes. Tails Kermoja stands alone on the red carpet, looking around frantically like a cornered animal. He mutters that letting someone as dangerous as Jin roam free is a risk the kingdom can never afford to take. The remaining knights are left standing in a daze, their weapons held aimlessly as they realize their quarry is gone. A low, confused murmur ripples through the ranks as they search for any sign of the silver-haired intruder. The 3rd Division leader barks out orders, her face twisted in a snarl of pure fury. She demands that her men search every inch of the hall, unable to believe that a single human could just disappear from a locked room. Smoke and dust slowly settle on the empty floor where Jin was standing just moments ago. The echo of his cold, calm voice still lingers in the air, explaining that his only goal is to protect the people. Tails Kermoja suddenly feels a chill run down his spine and turns his head with a start. Behind him, a shadow has appeared out of nowhere. Jin is standing right at his back, a silent, lethal presence. Jin's face is a mask of cold, uncompromising intent as he stares down at the terrified prince. He delivers a chilling warning, stating that he has no mercy for villains who cast a shadow over the lives of innocent people. Jin looms over the first prince, his ice-blue eyes glowing with a predatory light that seems to see right through the royal soul. He asks a simple, terrifying question: which kind of person is Tails really? In a complete reversal of power, Jin holds his blade to the prince's throat in front of his entire court. The dozens of knights stay frozen in place, knowing that any movement will mean the immediate death of their master. Jin calls him out by his full title, First Prince Tails Kermoja, stripping away any pretense of royal authority. He makes it clear that in this moment, a crown means nothing against the edge of a sword. Close up on the prince's face, which has gone as pale as death. His crimson eyes are wide with the realization that he is just 1 inch away from the end of his life. The goat-eared 3rd Division leader shouts at Jin from across the room, asking if he even realizes the consequences of his actions. Jin simply replies with a short, firm, "I do," his voice echoing with absolute certainty. She grits her teeth, her face a mask of helpless rage, as she watches her prince being held like a common prisoner. Jin calmly explains that he is only resisting someone who tried to force something completely unreasonable upon him. Commander Wassa, the massive bull beastman, cringes on the floor as he trembles with fear. He asks if Jin truly intends to oppose the entire country and everything it stands for. Jin looks back at him with a deadpan expression, his eyes glowing with that same otherworldly blue light. He tells the commander that he isn't the one opposing the country. The corrupt leaders are the true enemies of the people. Hardin watches the standoff with a pained expression, seeing his world crumble in front of him. He knows that if the rules had been followed and the requests were reasonable, Jin would have shown the royalty the respect they craved. Argus stays silent, his eyes fixed on the man he once called a hero. He reflects on Jin's words, realizing that the prince brought this catastrophe upon himself through his own greed. The 3rd Division leader stands with her division, her expression one of frustrated, impotent silence. She can't find a single word to argue against the cold, hard logic of the man holding her prince hostage. Commander Wassa remains pinned to the ground by his own fear, his face pale as he listens to Jin's final warning. Jin makes it clear that if they plan to use force to get their way, they can't complain when he uses it right back. Close up on Jin's mouth as he continues his lecture, his tone devoid of any emotion. He tells the room that he wants to ask one more thing before this encounter reaches its final conclusion. Jin leans in close, his voice a low, chilling whisper that only the prince can hear. He asks if Tails really thought every living person would simply bow their heads and go the way he wanted them to. Tails Kermosia stares blankly into the distance, his eyes trembling with a mixture of terror and shock. He looks like a man who has just come face to face with a force he can't possibly understand or control. Jin's eyes glow with a blinding, ethereal blue intensity, his gaze piercing through the prince's carefully constructed facade. He waits for an answer, his presence filling the entire audience hall with a suffocating pressure. Suddenly, the massive doors at the far end of the hall burst open, and a new presence enters the room. A wide shot shows the knights and commanders turning their heads in surprise, their focus shifting toward the entrance. A pair of delicate, blue-heeled feet step onto the red carpet, a luxurious and ornate gown trailing behind. The mysterious newcomer walks with a calm, regal grace that immediately commands the attention of everyone in the room. A beautiful young woman with long, silver lavender hair and fur-tipped ears walks into the light of the hall. She wears a friendly, practiced smile as she asks if she might join the conversation as well. The woman is revealed to be Charlotte Kermosia, the 2nd princess of the kingdom. She stands gracefully before the tense group, her presence immediately de-escalating the violent atmosphere with a single look. Commander Wassa looks up from the floor, his face filled with a mixture of immense relief and awe. He breathes out her name, Lady Charlotte, as if she were a guardian angel sent to save him from certain death. Argus lets out a long, weary sigh of relief, his shoulders finally relaxing as he sheaths his sword. He mutters to himself that she made it just in time to stop the audience hall from becoming a tomb. Argus watches as the princess glides past him toward her brother, her eyes fixed on the man holding him at sword point. He thinks to himself that he'll leave the rest of this mess to the one person who can actually handle it. Charlotte Kermosia lets out a playful, mocking laugh as she looks at her brother's pathetic state. She asks if he's having quite a fun time with his little power trip, her voice dripping with royal sarcasm. Tails Kermosia looks at his sister with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. He mutters her name, Charlotte, through gritted teeth, clearly despising her for stealing his moment and his control. Close-up of Tails Kermosia's crimson eye as he glares at his sister. Even in this humiliating position, his pride and his hatred for his sibling are the only things keeping him from collapsing entirely. Tails Kermosia stares directly at Argus with a look of pure irritation. He has pinned all the blame on the knight, branding him as the one who sabotaged his entire plan. Charlotte Kermosia lets out a weary sigh, her hand resting on her neck as she looks at her brother with thinly veiled annoyance. She tells Tails that his behavior is troubling, adding that she should have been invited if a hero was being honored. A faint, mocking smile plays on the 2nd princess's lips as she leans in closer to the confrontation. She pointedly reminds Tails that he isn't even their father's official representative in this matter. Close up on the first prince's mouth, his teeth bared and gritted in a snarl of absolute fury. The public reminder of his limited authority is a sting he clearly cannot stomach. Tails Kermosia stands rigid beside Jin Shido, his glare fixed on his sister with lethal intensity. He snaps back at her, declaring that the man standing before them is no hero at all. Pointing a finger directly at the silver-haired warrior, Tails brands Jin Shido a criminal who has dared to bare his fangs at the royal family. Jin remains perfectly still, his expression as cold and immovable as a block of ice. Charlotte Kermosia stands in the center of the hall, her presence commanding enough to make the battle-hardened commanders flinch. Below her, the massive bull beastman, Commander Wassa, trembles on his knees in the wake of the unfolding disaster. Commander Wassa looks up with sweat pouring down his face, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. Charlotte's voice rings out again, asking with deceptive sweetness if the rudeness came from the prince himself. The Goat Beastman, leader of the 3rd Division, points frantically toward the stairs, her voice cracking as she warns that Jin is about to harm the first prince. The guards are frozen, caught between their orders and the princess's authority. Tails Kermosia flinches, his head snapping back toward Jin as panic begins to override his arrogance. Above him, a small inset of Charlotte's face appears, dryly nodding that Jin is merely standing there. Jin Shido's eyes narrow as a subtle, knowing smile touches his face while he looks toward the second princess. Charlotte addresses him directly, seeking confirmation for her observations of the situation. With a mockingly polite gesture, Jin Shido places a hand over his heart and bows his head slightly toward the royal pair. He calmly explains that his only intention was to stand behind the prince and ask him a single question. Tails Kermosia's face is shown in a tight close-up, his features contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred as he listens to Jin's explanation. The humiliation of being toyed with is clearly more than he can bear. Charlotte Kermosia rests her chin on her hand, her expression one of amused disbelief as she looks at her brother. She asks if he is truly so small-minded as to label a national hero a criminal for something as trivial as his positioning. Tails Kermosia stands with his fists clenched at his sides, his crimson eyes burning with a silent, murderous rage. He is trapped by his sister's logic and Jin's overwhelming presence, unable to find a way to strike back. Turning her back to the prince, Charlotte Kermosia addresses Jin Shido with a formal and respectful tone once more. The shift in her attention signals that her brother's tantrum is officially over as far as she is concerned. The second princess sinks into a graceful, perfectly executed curtsy, holding the edges of her ornate blue gown. She tells Jin that she won't demand his service to the crown, but asks if he would lend his help simply as a friend. Jin Shido looks down at the princess, the coldness in his ice-blue eyes finally beginning to thaw into a genuine smile. He accepts her offer without hesitation, agreeing to lend his strength when the country truly needs it. Charlotte Kermosia claps her hands together with a bright, cheerful laugh that breaks the lingering tension in the hall. She thanks him warmly, but notes that the blood-stained audience hall is hardly a fitting place for a proper conversation. The princess's blue heels click across the red carpet as she leads the way out of the room, her gown trailing behind her like a royal banner. In the background, Commander Wassa remains collapsed on the floor, a broken man amidst the ruins of the prince's plot. With a single, authoritative sweep of her hand, Charlotte Kermosia commands the entire room to stand down. She orders the guards to clear the way immediately and show the proper respect to her new friend. The 3rd Division leader and the remaining knights immediately sheath their weapons and bow their heads in a synchronized display of obedience. They reply with a sharp, disciplined, "Yes," as the princess's word becomes the new law of the room. Tails Kermosia glares at the retreating figures, his teeth gritted so hard that the sound of grinding bone seems to echo in the silence. He watches his sister strip away his authority with effortless ease, his hatred for her reaching a new peak. A wide shot shows a royal horse-drawn carriage departing from the massive stone gates of the castle. Inside, the sound of Jin's voice can be heard admitting that the confrontation in the hall was actually quite terrifying. Inside the plush interior of the carriage, Argus, blonde knight, sits across from Jin Shido, his expression one of lingering shock. He asks Jin directly why he would do something so incredibly reckless as to hold the first prince at sword point. A dark, looming silhouette of Tails Kermoja appears in Jin's mind, symbolizing the persistent threat the prince represents. Jin reflects on the strange, unsettling aura he felt from the royal, hoping that the danger he sensed was just his imagination. Close up on Jin Shido's eye, his gaze sharp and contemplative as he processes the events that nearly led to a massacre. He knows that his battle with the royal family is far from over. Charlotte Kermoja sits composed on the carriage seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she looks at her guests. She tells Jin that he doesn't need to thank her, as it was his actions that truly saved them earlier. The second princess bows her head slightly, her silver lavender hair falling forward as she offers a sincere apology. She explains that rather than being treated like a criminal, the hero who saved the country deserves the kingdom's deepest gratitude. Looking back up with a confident and regal smile, she formally introduces herself to Jin Shido as Charlotte, the second princess of the kingdom. It is a fresh start for a relationship that began under the shadow of a blade. Charlotte asks Jin to continue being a good friend to the royal family, her eyes full of a calculated warmth. Jin offers a simple, respectful yes in response, sealing their new and fragile alliance. Argus, blonde knight, looks between the two of them with a deeply troubled expression. He admits that he still cannot fathom why the first prince would take such a disastrously reckless action against a man like Jin. Charlotte's expression turns grave as she looks out the carriage window at the passing scenery. She begins to explain the truth behind her brother's actions, nodding that Tails is driven by a dangerous and unchecked ambition. A haunting flashback depicts a landscape ravaged by the fires of war, with knights clashing in a desperate struggle for territory. Charlotte reveals that once Tails takes the throne, he plans to plunge the entire continent into a series of bloody wars. In the present, Jin Shido listens with a stoic, unreadable expression as he rests his chin on a gloved hand. Charlotte suggests that the prince viewed Jin's sheer power as a potential obstacle that needed to be removed before his plans could begin. Charlotte Kermoja claps her hands together with a bright, reassuring smile that seems to chase away the dark omens of war. She promises Jin that she will not let her brother interfere with him or his life any longer. A wide shot reveals a quiet royal bedchamber, where a lone figure sits upon the grand imperial bed. Charlotte mentions that Hardin is currently in the middle of reporting today's events to their father, the king. Back in the carriage, Charlotte's eyes take on a sharp, determined glint as she looks at her companions. She declares with absolute certainty that she has no intention of ever letting her brother ascend to the throne. The second princess leans forward, her intense blue gaze locking onto Jin's. She asks him a final, heavy question, whether he is willing to believe in her and the future she envisions for the kingdom. Jin Shido looks back at her with a small, confident smile that matches her own determination. He gives her a firm, unwavering yes, fully aware of the political storm they are about to enter together. A high-angle shot shows the carriage rolling smoothly along a forest road lined with lush greenery. Above, the voices of Argus and Charlotte drift out, discussing the nature of the reward Jin deserves for his service. The carriage comes to a halt in a sun-drenched clearing just outside the castle walls. Charlotte and Argus stand by the door, surrounded by a small detachment of guards, as the princess remarks that a hero like Jin must be properly rewarded. Jin Shido steps out from the carriage, his gaze meeting Charlotte Kermoja's as she stands waiting on the manicured grass. She mentions having heard that he was currently staying at an inn, her expression curious but polite. The silver-haired warrior moves past the open carriage door while Argus, blonde knight, stands at a respectful distance, watching the exchange. Charlotte looks up at Jin with a bright, welcoming smile, the lush greenery of the estate grounds stretching out behind them. With a grand, sweeping gesture of her hand toward a massive structure just out of view, Charlotte Kermoja beams with pride. She announces that they have prepared a special reward for him, while Jin and Argus look on with expressions of quiet surprise. Charlotte leads the way with a bright smile, sweeping her arm out toward the property. She's been waiting to show Shido Jin what they've prepared for him. Jin stops in his tracks, his eyes widening as he takes in the view. The sheer scale of the gift seems to have caught him completely off guard. Standing before them is a massive, three-story villa that looks more like a palace than a house. Its white stone walls and grand columns gleam under the bright morning sun. Charlotte explains that the estate once belonged to a noble who left the capital long ago. She encourages Jin to make himself at home and use the entire place however he likes. Jin stands at the entrance, leaning against the massive wooden door frame. He looks around with a quiet expression, perhaps wondering if he really belongs in a place this grand. The foyer is even more impressive, featuring a grand staircase and a crystal chandelier hanging from a vaulted ceiling. The gold-patterned floors reflect the light pouring in from the massive windows. Jin turns to Charlotte and Argus, questioning if it's really appropriate for him to receive such a lavish gift. He wonders aloud if this isn't far too much for a simple reward. Charlotte brushes off his concerns with a gentle smile, assuring him it's perfectly fine. She mentions that since the count who owned it is gone, the place is just sitting empty. Jin asks if the previous owner might return to claim it one day. Charlotte simply laughs it off, telling him not to worry about such things. Even so, Jin feels like a whole house is a bit excessive for a single person. Argus chimes in, explaining that this gift is a direct reflection of how much the Empire values his strength. Argus flashes a confident grin, telling Jin to just walk in without overthinking it. He seems proud to be the one delivering such good news. He declares that the villa is officially Jin's home now. From the top of the stairs, Jin looks back down at them, still seemingly overwhelmed by the gesture. Jin begins exploring the various rooms, finding each one more elegant than the last. Even the dining area is set up for a feast he doesn't have anyone to share it with. He eventually finds himself in a private study filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. Argus and Charlotte watch from the doorway as he takes it all in. Jin takes a seat, resting his chin on his gloved hand as he looks out over the room. He remains silent for a moment, simply observing the quiet luxury of his new surroundings. He finally makes it to the master bedroom and finds it's almost the size of a whole apartment. He sits on the edge of the bed, nodding that it's far too big for just one man. Seeing his hesitation, Argus suggests that they could arrange for a staff of servants to help manage the property. He doesn't want Jin to have to worry about cleaning such a huge place. Jin's mind immediately goes to the kind of help he's used to, but Argus and Charlotte just share a knowing look. They're determined to treat him with the respect his power deserves. Jin looks at Argus, admitting that he already feels like he owes them far too much. He isn't used to accepting handouts without giving something back. He asks if there's a request they have for him in exchange for all this. He'd much rather earn his keep through action. The scene shifts to the bustling training grounds of the 7th Division. The air is filled with the sound of shouting and the rhythmic clashing of practice weapons. Rows of soldiers are locked in intense sparring matches. They're using wooden swords and spears, pushing each other to the limit under the watchful eyes of their officers. Karina, a fierce warrior with dog ears, is in the middle of a heated bout. She lets out a roar as she drives her spear forward with incredible speed. Her orange eyes are narrowed with focus, showing a level of intensity that stands out even among the elite troops. She isn't just training, she's fighting to win. Wood meets wood with a heavy thud as she parries an incoming strike. The force of the impact sends vibrations through her arms, but she doesn't budge. With a sudden burst of power, Karina spins her spear and delivers a punishing blow that sends her opponent's weapon flying. She stands over him, panting as she claims her victory. The soldier she was fighting looks completely drained, sweating and gasping for air on the ground. He clearly wasn't ready for that final surge of energy. Karina finally lets her guard down, leaning on her spear and admitting she's done for the day. She's pushed herself as far as she can go. A fellow warrior approaches with a bottle of water, praising Karina for how much she's improved lately. Despite the win, Karina doesn't look satisfied. She grips her bottle tightly, her expression darkening as she thinks back to their recent mission. She feels like her current level of strength just isn't enough. A memory flashes through her mind, a massive, tentacled beast that towered over the city. She remembers being able to handle the small fries, but the real threats were beyond her. She growls in frustration, scratching at her head as she puzzles over the recent battle. She can't wrap her mind around how a member of an inferior species could have shown them all up. Suddenly, a voice rings out across the field, announcing the arrival of the commander and Lady Charlotte. The training ground falls quiet as the high-ranking visitors enter. The group walks onto the main square, led by Charlotte in her grand gown. The soldiers stand at attention, curious about why the princess has come to the training grounds. Jin walks just behind her, his calm expression a sharp contrast to the high-energy atmosphere of the barracks. He doesn't look like a typical warrior, which only draws more eyes. Karina's eyes widen in shock as she recognizes the man standing next to the royals. Her teeth clench as she realizes exactly who just stepped onto her training ground. She watches from the sidelines, wondering what on earth he's doing here of all places. The other soldiers whisper among themselves, equally confused by the stranger's presence. Argus steps forward, gesturing for Charlotte to take a seat as they prepare for the formal introductions. He's here to set things in motion. Jin turns to Argus, asking bluntly what it is they actually want him to do. He isn't one for long, drawn-out ceremonies. Argus looks out over the rows of soldiers and gives a simple answer. He wants Jin to train them. He knows that the current state of the army won't be enough for what's coming. His expression turns serious as he reminds Jin about the recklessness they saw from Prince Tails earlier. He knows the prince won't stop at just one incident. He explains the dangerous struggle for the throne between Prince Tails and Lady Charlotte. Since they don't know what the prince will do next, Argus believes the division needs to be ready for anything. Argus stands before the 7th Division, declaring that only those with sworn loyalty can truly protect Lady Charlotte. Behind him, Karina and the rest of the unit stand at attention, looking ready for anything. He turns to Shido Jin, explaining that they have no idea when Prince Tails might make his next move. Because the threat is so unpredictable, he wants Jin to start training the division immediately. Jin stands quietly on the sidelines, watching a pair of soldiers spar with wooden practice blades. He remains silent, his expression unreadable as he observes their movements. A sharp crack of wood on wood echoes through the yard as one soldier parries a heavy blow. Jin notes to himself that they clearly aren't lacking in basic skill or effort. On the other side of the grounds, more troops are grinding through sets of push-ups in the dirt, their bodies slick with sweat. Jin can see they take their daily conditioning seriously. One soldier pushes himself through a heavy sword routine, his muscles tensing with every swing of the weighted practice blade. The dedication of the 7th Division is evident in every corner of the field. Karina stops to catch her breath, wiping sweat from her brow after an intense session. Even as a beastman with natural physical advantages, she's clearly pushing herself to her limit. Watching them work brings a faint, nostalgic smile to Shido Jin's face. He remembers a time long ago when he was in their shoes, pushing his own body past its breaking point. 100 million years ago, a younger Jin spent his days sprinting through high-tech facilities and hauling massive stacks of tires. He didn't have magic, only his own iron discipline to rely on. He spent countless hours in the gym, building his frame on heavy machines to become a top-tier agent for his country. Back then, he trained as if his life depended on every single rep. Returning to the present, Argus calls for the entire unit to gather in the center of the grounds. He stands on the raised steps alongside Shido Jin and Princess Charlotte to address the troops. He announces that to take their combat readiness to the next level, they've invited the Empire's hero to serve as a special instructor. The soldiers look up with a mix of curiosity and respect. Jin's gaze remains sharp as he scans the faces of the soldiers before him. He's looking for something beyond just physical strength in his new pupils. Many of the soldiers are excited, whispering about how this is the man who single-handedly took down a giant corruptor. They seem more than ready to learn from a legend. Karina, however, stands with her hands on her hips and a skeptical look on her face. Jin knows that while most are ready to listen, winning over the stubborn ones will be the real challenge. Jin steps forward to address the group, his tone calm and professional. He tells them that before they get into advanced techniques, he wants to get a baseline for their stamina. He gives them a simple first task: start running laps around the massive training ground. The command catches them off guard, and Karina can't help but let out a confused shout. She isn't shy about speaking up, arguing that they already do physical conditioning every single day. In her eyes, they've already proven they have more than enough stamina. She steps forward aggressively, questioning if Jin just came here to waste their time with basic exercises. One of her comrades tries to quiet her down, but Karina is too annoyed to care. Argus shuts down his student's insolence immediately. He locks eyes with her, his gaze cold and unwavering. He offers a compromise, suggesting that they can change the training method if she thinks she's already at her peak. The suggestion clearly piques Karina's interest. Jin reaches up and unbuttons his noble coat, letting it slide off his shoulders. Underneath, he's wearing a simple white shirt, looking far more ready for action. He tosses the heavy coat aside and walks toward the weapon rack at the edge of the grounds. His movements are fluid and confident, drawing the eyes of everyone watching. He turns back to her, confirming if the spear is indeed her weapon of choice. Karina looks on in confusion, unsure of where this is going. Jin picks up a practice spear and tosses it into a ready position. He issues a challenge. If Karina can land even a single point against him, they can skip the running entirely. Argus and Charlotte watch from the sidelines, both looking intrigued by the sudden turn of events. Jin adds that there's no time limit, she just needs one successful strike. He looks her dead in the eye, noting that soldiers only respect strength. He knows he has to prove he's more than just a title if they're going to follow his lead. Karina's skeptical expression melts into a fierce grin as she bares her fangs. She looks at the practice spear in his hands and asks if he even knows how to use it. In response, Jin begins to spin the spear with such blinding speed that it becomes a blur of wood and wind. The force of the rotation kicks up a gale that whips around him. Karina and the other soldiers can only watch in stunned silence as the air whistles around the spinning weapon. They've never seen a human handle a spear with such effortless precision. With a sharp snap, Jin brings the spear to a halt behind his back, his posture perfectly balanced. The wind settles as he waits for her to make the first move. He stands tall, declaring with absolute confidence that there isn't a single weapon in existence he hasn't mastered. Now, it's time for Karina to see it for herself. A look back 100 million years. Shido Jin stands in a high-tech training facility, gripping a long spear while modern treadmills line the background. He pulls his weight up on a bar, every muscle defined as he pushes through a grueling set. The sound of shifting metal fills the silent gym. A sudden strike cuts through the air. Shido Jin swings the practice spear with surgical precision, sweat dripping from his brow as he focuses on his form. From the shadows, Kagura watches the display. Shido Jin keeps his stance low, ready for the next rotation of his solo drill. He stops to catch his breath, the intensity of the workout finally catching up to him. He wipes the sweat away, his focus never wavering even in his downtime. Kagura approaches, holding a cup with a straw. He asks if training is the only thing his top agent does for fun, questioning if he has any hobbies. Kagura tosses a drink over, which Shido Jin catches without looking. The scientist remarks that even the most dedicated soldier needs a life outside the gym. Shido Jin takes a long sip as Kagura continues to nag him about resting. Being the country's best asset doesn't mean he has to work himself to death every single day. Shido Jin wipes his mouth and retorts that he doesn't have the luxury of time. Infiltration missions are unpredictable, and he has to be ready for the worst-case scenario. He describes the chaos of being sent in with nothing. In his mind, he sees himself wielding ordinary kitchen pans to take down armed guards in a high-stakes raid. To him, anything is a weapon if used correctly. He grips the spear again, emphasizing that survival depends on mastering whatever tool falls into his hands. Kagura stays silent for a moment, watching the determination in the young agent's eyes. He realizes that no amount of logic will get this man to slow down. Kagura promises that one day, he'll invent something so powerful that Shido Jin won't have to scrounge for weapons. He wants to ensure his friend actually comes back from his missions. Back in the present, the clash of wood on wood echoes through the arena. Shido Jin and Karina move in a blur, their spears meeting in a high-speed dance of offense and defense. Karina lunges forward with a fierce growl, her spear aiming true. Shido Jin barely shifts his weight, catching the blow on his shaft and guiding it harmlessly aside. His gaze remains unnervingly calm during the exchange. He watches her every twitch, anticipating the next move before her muscles even begin to fire. The weapons collide again with a sharp crack. Splinters fly as the force of the impact vibrates through the training grounds, drawing the eyes of every soldier watching. Shido Jin pushes back, forcing Karina to retreat a step. He doesn't waste energy on flashy moves, sticking to the fundamentals he mastered millions of years ago. Karina's eyes widen in disbelief as she finds the tip of his spear resting just inches from her throat. Her heart hammers as she realizes how easily he could have ended it. Shido Jin lowers his weapon, his voice steady. He points out that this is her 15th loss in a row, yet she hasn't managed to land a single hit. Karina grits her teeth, a frustrated growl rumbling in her chest. She refuses to accept that a human is outclassing her so thoroughly in front of her subordinates. She shouts for one more round and lunges again, her movements becoming more desperate. The spear whistles through the air, driven by pure emotion. Shido Jin parries the strike with a simple flick of his wrist. He doesn't even need to move his feet to stay out of her reach. The air pressure from the swing ruffles the air around them. Shido Jin stands his ground, waiting for her to recover her balance as she overextends. He acknowledges that her movements are fast and her reaction speed isn't half bad. It's a rare bit of praise, but it's delivered with the cold tone of an instructor. Karina lets out a scream and brings her spear down in a massive overhead arc. She's putting every ounce of her strength into this one final attempt to break his defense. Shido Jin catches the heavy strike, the impact echoing across the grounds. He notes that her raw power is impressive, but power alone won't win a fight. But even Jin is stunned to realize he's facing something that far transcends a normal human. He wonders to himself, is this the true power of what's called an evolved human? A sharp light gleams in Shido Jin's eyes as he prepares to end the farce. He sees the openings in her stance that her pride has blinded her to. With a lightning-fast counter, he strikes her spear and sends it spinning out of her hands. Karina collapses as her weapon clatters across the stone floor. He tells her firmly that this is the end of the duel. He stands over her, his posture relaxed while she struggles to draw a full breath. Karina tries to push herself back up, insisting she can still fight. Shido Jin shuts her down immediately, telling her that continuing is useless in her current state. He turns his back and starts to walk away, giving her a harsh truth to swallow. She lacks the basic stamina required for a real battle, and her performance drops with every minute. Karina can only watch him go, her lungs burning as she gasps for air. Behind her, the rest of the 7th Division sits in stunned silence at the display. Shido Jin reflects on her technique as he walks. She relies entirely on her innate physical gifts, leaving her movements unrefined and predictable to a trained eye. He realizes that the warriors of this era have become soft, leaning too heavily on spirit magic in combat. They've forgotten the value of honing their physical fundamentals. A visual of a magic user flashes through his mind, symbolizing the shift in combat styles. To a soldier from the ancient world, it's a glaring weakness. He thinks back to the warriors of his own time, where survival was earned through blood and relentless training. The standards for ability back then were on an entirely different level. He stops and looks back at the kneeling girl, delivering his first order. If she wants to stand a chance, she needs to build her stamina from the ground up. Karina glares at the ground, a single word of frustration escaping her lips. The humiliation is bitter, but she can't deny the gap in their actual power. Shido Jin reaches down, offering her a gloved hand to help her up. He asks if she can stand, his expression neutral as if the duel was nothing more than a warm-up. Karina looks at the hand, then up at his face. She notices he isn't even sweating after defeating her 15 times, and she's forced to admit his superiority. Shido Jin stands calm after the duel. Karina stares at him, realizing the gap in their power is far wider than she imagined. She wipes the sweat from her forehead, her earlier arrogance completely gone. She can't help but acknowledge that he's on another level. Shido Jin reaches out, and Karina takes his hand. It's a silent sign of respect between a teacher and a student who just learned a hard lesson. He turns to address the rest of the 7th Division, who have been watching the entire exchange in stunned silence. The atmosphere has shifted from mockery to intense focus. With a simple command, Shido Jin kicks off the real training. He tells the bewildered soldiers to start running, and the sound of heavy boots hitting the stone soon fills the air. As the sun begins to set over the imperial capital, a crow takes flight across the orange sky. The peaceful view hides the dark movements happening deep within the city's walls. Prince Tails walks through the damp corridors of the royal dungeon, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows against the stone. His expression is cold, his mind already several steps ahead. He reaches a heavy iron gate and signals for the guards to open it. The screech of rusted metal echoes through the hollow halls. Inside a dimly lit cell, Lord Rudman sits in chains, his hands bound. He looks up as the prince enters, his eyes narrowing in the sudden light. A twisted smile spreads across the old noble's face. He remarks that a truly big figure has come to visit him in his misery. Prince Tails stands before the bars, looking down at the man who orchestrated the recent incident. He calmly states that he's here because he wanted to talk for a bit. Lord Rudman doesn't seem intimidated by the royal presence. He waits for the prince to speak, curious about what business the ambitious young man could have with a prisoner. He scoffs, telling Prince Tails that there's nothing left for them to discuss. He seems resigned to his fate, or perhaps he's just waiting for the right moment. Prince Tails lets out a dark chuckle, noting how relaxed Lord Rudman seems even in this situation. He asks if the old man is still holding onto some secret plan. Lord Rudman leans back, his gaze unreadable. He wonders aloud about the future, cryptically hinting that the royal family's reign isn't as secure as they think. He leans in and tells Prince Tails that the royal family will eventually fall, regardless of whether he escapes or not. Prince Tails just smiles, his red eyes gleaming with interest. Prince Tails places a hand over his heart, mocking the old man's dire prediction. He seems entirely unfazed by the threat of rebellion or collapse. He reaches into his cloak and pulls out a purple pendant that pulses with an eerie light. He asks if Lord Rudman's confidence comes from using this specific power. The sight of the artifact drains the color from Lord Rudman's face. He stares at the glowing gem as if he's seen a ghost. He stammers in shock, demanding to know how Prince Tails even knows about its existence. Prince Tails just smirks, asking if Lord Rudman really thought he was the only one in on the secret. Behind Prince Tails, the ghostly image of a corruptor appears, linked to the pendant. He identifies it as an invasion tool, a device designed to seal and manipulate dark powers. Prince Tails confirms that Lord Rudman most likely used this very tool to cause the chaos during the recent incident. His voice is smooth, but the threat underneath is razor-sharp. Lord Rudman starts to sweat, his composure finally breaking under the prince's pressure. Prince Tails tells him to stay calm, as the real conversation is only just beginning. He points out that Lord Rudman clearly despises the current royal family. He makes a sudden offer. Why shouldn't they join forces and change the status quo together? As Prince Tails speaks, he envisions the capital engulfed in flames. He believes his father and Charlotte are too weak to lead, and that the country is destined to fall under their rule. Lord Rudman is taken aback, questioning if a prince is truly planning to destroy his own family line. Prince Tails doesn't hesitate, confirming that's exactly his intent. He believes the nation needs to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. He sees himself as the one to lead a new, more authoritative empire with a legion of powerful knights at his back. But for his plan to work, he needs the power of the invasion tools that Lord Rudman has been hiding. It's a high-stakes trade of power for a chance at a new world order. Lord Rudman thinks it over for a moment before agreeing to the deal. He says he doesn't mind the plan, but he expects something substantial in return for his cooperation. Prince Tails holds out the purple pendant, its light intensifying. He tells Lord Rudman there's one non-negotiable condition: absolute loyalty. Lord Rudman repeats the word as if it's a joke, wondering why the prince would care about an oath. Prince Tails simply says he has no intention of being betrayed once his plan is in motion. Internally, Lord Rudman laughs at the prince's naivety. He plans to use Prince Tails for his own ends, and then dispose of him the moment the oath is no longer convenient. With a fake sense of resolve, he swears that he has no intention of abandoning the royal bloodline. He thinks his lie is perfect, but he's playing right into the prince's hands. He officially swears his loyalty to Prince Tails, his hand reaching toward the glowing invasion tool. He believes it's just words, a minor price to pay for his freedom. Prince Tail's smile widens into something predatory as the oath is spoken. He asks for confirmation, wanting to hear the words one last time. Suddenly, the pendant erupts in a violent surge of purple energy. The magic lashes out, surrounding the two men in a whirlwind of dark power. Lord Rudman's eyes go wide as the magical shock hits him. He realizes too late that Prince Tails wasn't just asking for a verbal promise. He let out a strangled cry as the magic forces its way into his mind. Glowing runes swirl around him, binding his soul to the words he just spoke. Prince Tails explains the true nature of the invasion tool. It places a strong suggestion on anyone who speaks specific words while under its influence. The magic is absolute. Even if the words were intended as a lie, the tool rewrites the victim's consciousness until they believe it was their true intent. Lord Rudman's free will is being systematically erased. The light fades, leaving the dungeon in silence once more. Lord Rudman collapses to his knees, his head bowing low before the prince. When he looks up, his eyes have turned a hollow, glowing purple. He addresses Prince Tails as "My Lord," completely stripped of his own ambitions and ready to serve his new master. Prince Tails walks away from the cell, his long cape trailing behind him on the stone floor. He leaves Lord Rudman kneeling in the dim light, his mind now a mere extension of the prince's will. Tails' final words echo through the corridor, declaring that Rudman and everyone else are nothing more than pieces for him to use as he sees fit. Prince Tails crouches in front of the submissive Lord Rudman, his face lit by the warm glow of the library. He dismisses both Princess Charlotte and the noble, claiming that neither of them is the rightful ruler. As the sun dips below the horizon, Shido Jin leads the 7th Division on a grueling run across the stone courtyard. Behind him, Karina and the other soldiers push through their exhaustion, while Charlotte and Argus watch the training session from a distance.